I'm 37 years old. I'm a financial advisor. I have a master's degree from MIT and a six-figure salary. And 2 nights ago, my parents sat me at the kids' table. Not as a joke. Not as a cute family moment. They actually seated me, a grown woman, next to 3 children with crayons and paper placemats, while my younger sister, Elena, who just got married 6 months ago, sat at the adult table like royalty. My mother looked me in the eyes and said, "Oh, honey, there wasn't enough room at the grown-up table. You understand." 40 people watched this happen. Neighbors, family friends, church members. Nobody said a word. So I stayed seated for exactly 12 minutes. I smiled. I was polite. Then I walked out through the side exit, got in my car, and drove 2 hours back to Boston without saying goodbye to anyone. By the time I hit the highway, I had 23 missed calls. But here's the thing. Nobody knew. That humiliation. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because while my mother was trying to make me feel small, she made one catastrophic mistake. She forgot that my grandmother left me something. Something my parents have been using and stealing from for years. Something worth almost $1 million that they thought was theirs. And the moment I walked out of that restaurant, I decided I was done being invisible. What happened next destroyed my family's secrets, exposed decades of lies, and forced my mother to face a truth she'd been hiding since before I was born. This is the story of how a kid's table turned into a courtroom, and how I built something so powerful that cruelty didn't just lose it, became irrelevant. Buckle up. This gets messy. My name is Amanda Vega. I'm 37 years old, and for the past decade, I've built a career as a financial advisor in Boston, the kind of career that lets me wear tailored suits, drive a reliable car, and sleep soundly, knowing my retirement account is growing exactly as planned. I left my Connecticut hometown 15 years ago with a full scholarship to MIT and a determination to prove that intelligence mattered more than charm. What I didn't expect was that leaving home would become the safest thing I ever did. The invitation arrived 3 weeks before Christmas. Heavy cardstock, gold-embossed lettering, my mother's elegant handwriting announcing a Vega family Christmas celebration at the Riverside Inn. I stared at it for 20 minutes, weighing whether the 2-hour drive and inevitable emotional exhaustion were worth maintaining the illusion of family harmony. In the end, I went. Not because I wanted to, but because some part of me, the part that still remembered being 13 and desperate for my mother's approval, hoped this year might be different. The Riverside Inn sits on the edge of the Connecticut River, all white columns and chandelier-lit windows that make it look like something out of a Christmas movie. I pulled into the parking lot at exactly 6:30 on Christmas Eve, my trunk loaded with carefully chosen gifts, a cashmere scarf for my mother, imported scotch for my father, and a hand-thrown pottery bowl for my sister Elena, who'd gotten married 6 months earlier in a wedding I wasn't asked to be part of. I wore my best dress, deep burgundy professional but festive, and checked my reflection 3 times before walking in, telling myself that this time I wouldn't let them make me feel small. The dining room took my breath away. Garlands of evergreen and white lights draped the walls, and a massive Christmas tree sparkled near the stone fireplace. But what stopped me cold were the 2 tables. The main table stretched nearly the length of the room, set with cream linens, real china, and gleaming silverware. 40 chairs surrounded it, already filling with familiar faces, aunts, uncles, neighbors, people from my parents' church. And then, in the corner near the swinging kitchen doors, I saw the second table. Smaller, covered with a plastic red tablecloth, paper placemats decorated with candy canes, a cup full of crayons in the center, the kids' table. My mother spotted me before I could process what I was seeing. "Amanda." "Oh, you made it." Gloria Vega is the kind of woman who weaponizes warmth. She rushed over all smiles and air kisses, her St. John suit probably costing more than my monthly rent. "Let me show you where you'll be sitting, sweetheart. We have such a fun spot for you." I followed my heels, clicking on the hardwood gifts still clutched in my hands like a shield. She walked past the main table, Past my father Rick, who gave me a weak wave. Past my sister Elena, radiant in a cream silk blouse, her new husband Marcus beside her, and led me directly to the corner. 3 children were already seated there. 2 boys around 8 and 9, deeply invested in a coloring book, and a girl who looked about 12 watching me with curious brown eyes. "Here you are," my mother announced, brightly pulling out a chair. "You'll be with the kids tonight. Isn't that sweet?" The room had gone quiet. I felt 40 pairs of eyes on me. I heard someone cough. A fork clinked against a plate. "Mom," I said quietly, "is this a joke?" Her smile didn't waver. "Oh, honey, there wasn't enough room at the grown-up table, and you're so good with kids. Plus, Elena and Marcus just got married. We wanted them to sit with family at the main table. You understand." She patted my shoulder and turned back toward the fireplace, already moving on, already done with me. I stood there frozen, my face burning. Elena wouldn't meet my eyes. My father studied his water glass like it held the secrets of the universe. Around the main table, conversations resumed in careful, too loud voices, everyone pretending they hadn't just witnessed my humiliation. I sat down. The chair was too small, clearly meant for actual children. My knees bumped the underside of the table. One of the boys offered me a green crayon without looking up from his coloring. "You can use this one. I'm done with it." "Thank you," I managed. The girl beside me leaned close and whispered, "My mom says you're the smart one in your family. She says you went to some really hard school and have a fancy job in the city." She paused, frowning. "So why do they treat you like you're nobody?" I felt something crack inside my chest. Out of the mouths of babes, this child who barely knew me had just articulated what I'd spent 15 years trying to deny, that my own family had decided I was invisible, disposable, suitable only for the margins. "That's a very good question," I whispered back, my voice steadier than I felt. The server appeared, a kind-faced woman in her 50s who looked at the seating arrangement and then at me with unmistakable pity. "Can I get you something to drink, ma'am?" "Water is fine, thank you." She brought bread, then salads. The main table received filet mignon and lobster tail. The kids' table got chicken nuggets and mac and cheese. I stared at the paper plate in front of me, watching condensation form on the plastic cup, and thought about every choice that had led me here. Every time I'd chosen career over marriage. Every time I'd prioritized competence over charm. Every time I'd believed that being smart, capable, and independent would eventually earn me respect. I stayed seated for exactly 12 minutes. I counted them. I watched my sister laugh at something Marcus said. I watched my mother hold court at the head of the table, glowing in the candlelight, entirely unbothered by what she'd done. I watched my father cut his steak with surgical precision, never once glancing toward the corner where his eldest daughter sat with children and crayons. And then very calmly I stood up. I pulled out my wallet, extracted $200 bills, and walked to the server station near the kitchen. "Excuse me," I said to the kind woman who'd brought me water. "This is for you. Thank you for your kindness." I pressed the cash into her hand along with a note I'd scribbled on the back of a receipt. "Thank you for your kindness." Her eyes widened. "Ma'am, this is too much. Merry Christmas," I said quietly. I walked past the main table without looking at anyone. Past the fireplace. Past the Christmas tree. I pushed through the heavy front door into the December night snow, falling in soft, fat flakes that caught in my hair. The cold air hit my lungs like a blessing. I got into my car, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot while Christmas carols played softly on the radio. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply drove. Somewhere around exit 52, my phone started buzzing. I glanced at the screen, Mom calling. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, and again. By the time I merged onto I-95 North, I had 23 missed calls, all from the same number. And then a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Don't leave town yet. This is about the house you think is theirs." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I read it again at a red light, my heart pounding. The house. My grandmother's house. The one at 428 Maple Street where I'd spent the happiest years of my childhood protected by a woman who actually saw me. I thought that house belonged to my parents. Everyone did. But whoever sent this text knew something I didn't. And suddenly the humiliation of tonight felt less like an ending and more like the beginning of something I should have seen coming years ago. I kept driving toward Boston, but I didn't go home. Instead, I pulled into a 24-hour diner, ordered coffee I wouldn't drink, and opened my laptop. It was time to find out what my family had been hiding. I sat in that diner booth for 2 hours. The coffee growing cold in front of me, staring at the text message that had upended everything I thought I knew. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and a tired waitress refilled cups I hadn't touched, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing backward through 37 years of memories, each one suddenly reframed by a single question. How long had my mother been planning to take something that wasn't hers? The pattern had always been there. I'd just been too close to see it. I was 16 when MIT sent the acceptance letter. Full scholarship, full ride. I remember running into the kitchen, waving the thick envelope, my heart nearly bursting. My mother was arranging flowers in a crystal vase, the afternoon light making everything look like a magazine spread. She glanced at the letter, then back at her roses. "That's nice, Amanda," she said, adjusting a stem. "But book smarts don't make you a good woman. Your sister knows how to make people feel special. That's a gift you can't learn in a classroom." I stood there, acceptance letter trembling in my hands, waiting for something more. Congratulations, pride, anything. She turned back to her flowers, and I understood I had achieved something she couldn't spin into social currency, so it simply didn't count. 7 years later, Elena got engaged to her college boyfriend. The engagement party cost $40,000. I know because I saw the invoice on my father's desk when I came home for Thanksgiving. A rented ballroom, a live band, a cake taller than I was. 200 guests. My mother spent months planning it, glowing with purpose, telling everyone who would listen about her daughter's romantic proposal on a beach in Cabo. When I made CFO at 35, running the financial operations of a firm with 80 employees and $20 million in annual revenue, no one called. Not my mother, not my father, not Elena. I waited 3 days thinking maybe they'd send flowers or a card. On the 4th day, I called my father myself. "Oh, that's wonderful, kiddo," he said, his voice warm but distant. "Your mother's at her book club. I'll tell her you called." He never mentioned my promotion. I don't know if he ever told her. That's when I finally understood. In my family, achievement was invisible unless it came with a ring or a baby or some other proof that you'd fulfilled the only role that mattered. I could run a company, manage millions, advise executives 3 times my age, but because I'd chosen career over marriage, competence over charm, I would always be the disappointing daughter. The one seated in corners. The one who didn't quite belong. My father, I think, knew it was wrong. Rick Vega is not a cruel man. He's just a weak one. Throughout my childhood, there were small moments of quiet rebellion. $20 bills slipped into my backpack before I left for college with a note that said, "For books." Emails that arrived late at night after my mother was asleep, subject lines reading, "Proud of you, kiddo." The messages never more than 2 sentences. He loved me in the shadows where it was safe, where it wouldn't start a fight. But when it mattered, he was silent. I was 13 the first time my mother hit me. We were getting ready for church, and she'd laid out a pink floral dress on my bed, the kind with a Peter Pan collar and puffy sleeves that made me look like a doll. I told her I didn't want to wear it. I wanted to wear pants and the sweater vest my grandmother had given me. "You'll wear what I tell you to wear," she said, her voice tight. "But I hate dresses. They're uncomfortable." The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. My cheek burned. My eyes watered, and my father stood in the doorway watching. I looked at him, waiting for him to say something to step between us, to tell her she couldn't do that. Instead, he looked at the floor. Later that night, he came to my room. "Your mother just wants what's best for you, Amanda. Try not to upset her, okay? It's easier for everyone when you just go along." That's when I learned the most important lesson of my childhood love in this family was conditional. It required silence, compliance, the willingness to make yourself smaller so others could feel bigger. My father loved me, but not enough to protect me. And that distinction carved a hollow space in my chest that never quite filled in. The only person who saw me clearly was my grandmother Rosa Delgado, Abuela Rosa, who came to this country with $20 and a ninth-grade education, who worked as a bank clerk for 30 years, who spoke English with an accent she never lost and never apologized for. When I was 13 and the tension at home became unbearable, Rosa told my parents she needed help around her house. She was getting older, she said. She needed someone to help with groceries and housework. It was a lie, of course. Rosa was 64 and healthy as an ox. She took me in for 2 years, and those were the only years of my childhood when I felt safe. We lived in the house on Maple Street, the one with the wide front porch and the garden Rosa tended like a sanctuary. She taught me to cook arroz con gandules, and to balance a checkbook, and to speak Spanish properly, not the broken fragments I'd picked up from TV. But more than that, she taught me about dignity. Strength is quiet, mija, she'd say, chopping onions at the kitchen counter, her hands sure and steady. Loud people are usually afraid. They make noise because they're worried you'll notice they're empty. But you have substance. Never forget that. When Rosa died in 2005, 2 months after I graduated from MIT, I thought I'd lost the only person who ever truly believed in me. I flew home for the funeral, sat in the back of the church, and cried harder than I'd cried for anything in my life. My mother stood at the front in a black designer suit accepting condolences like a grieving daughter, and I wondered if she'd ever really known the woman she was burying. I didn't realize then that Rosa had been preparing for this, that she'd seen my mother's cruelty for what it was, and had spent 20 years building a fortress around me, even after death. Now, sitting in a diner at midnight staring at my laptop screen, I saw the email. 15 years old, unread, the subject line glowing like a beacon important. Do not open until Gloria acts against you. The sender, Lawrence Mitchell, attorney at law. Rosa Delgado's attorney. My hand hovered over the mouse. Outside, snow had started falling again, and the diner was nearly empty. I clicked. The email from Lawrence Mitchell was brief and formal, the kind of language lawyers use when they know they're writing something that might be read in court someday. Dear Ms. Vega, per the instructions of Rosa Delgado, this message and its attachment are to remain unopened until such time as Gloria Vega takes action against your interests. If you are reading this, that time has come. The attached document is password protected. The hint is, the year I saved you from her. Once opened, follow all instructions carefully. You are not alone in this. Respectfully, Lawrence Mitchell Esquire. My cursor hovered over the PDF attachment. A password prompt appeared, and beneath it that single cryptic line, the year I saved you from her. I tried 1934, Rosa's birth year. Invalid password. I tried 2005, the year she died. Invalid. I tried 2001, my MIT graduation. Still nothing. My fingers rested on the keyboard, my mind racing through decades of memories, searching for the moment Rosa had saved me. There were so many small rescues, so many times she'd stepped between me and my mother's anger with nothing but her quiet presence. And then I remembered. 1998. I was 13. The incident that led to me living with Rosa for 2 years. The moment everything shifted. I typed the number slowly, 1998. The file opened. My breath caught. The header read Trust Agreement 2003, Rosa Delgado Trust, in bold official letters. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set down my coffee cup before I spilled it. The first page was dense with legal language, but one sentence cut through everything else like a knife. This irrevocable trust holds the property at 428 Maple Street, Hartford, Connecticut, valued at $890,000. The house. Rosa's house. The place where I'd felt safe. The place where I'd learned what love without conditions looked like. I'd always assumed it had passed to my parents when Rosa died. Everyone had. My mother acted like she owned it, redecorated it, hosted parties there, spoke about it as our family home, with the casual authority of ownership. But she didn't own it. She never had. I scrolled down, my heart pounding. The trust structure was laid out in meticulous detail. Rosa had established it in 2003, 2 years before her death, naming 2 co-trustees with equal authority: Richard Vega 50% and Amanda Rosa Vega 50%. My name. Right there in black and white in a document that was now 21 years old. I would have been 20 when this was signed. I was still in college. I had no idea. And then I saw the clause that made everything suddenly devastatingly clear. Gloria Martinez Vega is not a beneficiary of this trust. Should she attempt to claim sell mortgage or encumber this property without written consent from both trustees, ownership shall automatically transfer 100% to Amanda Vega, and Richard Vega shall be removed as co-trustee if he is found to lack legal capacity. I read it 3 times, each word sinking in deeper. Rosa hadn't just protected me financially. She'd predicted this. She'd known, even back in 2003, that my mother would eventually try to take what wasn't hers. She'd built a legal fortress around me, around that house, and she'd done it so quietly that no one knew it existed until the moment it mattered most. The house was never Gloria's, but Gloria clearly believed it was. And now I understood why tonight's humiliation had happened. My mother wasn't just being cruel for cruelty's sake. She was trying to push me away, to make me so uncomfortable that I'd stop coming home, stop asking questions, stop being present in a place she was trying to claim as her own. The email included login credentials for a bank account I'd never known existed. My fingers fumbled as I typed in the username and password, and when the account page loaded, my stomach dropped so hard I thought I might be sick. A home equity line of credit, $340,000. Opened in January 2022. Monthly payments of $4,200. The account history stretched back 2.5 years, a damning record of where the money had gone. $180,000, labeled E. Vega wedding expenses. Elena's wedding. The one I hadn't been asked to be part of. The massive affair at the country club with 200 guests and a band that had played at Carnegie Hall. $90,000 marked BMW lease E. Vega, my sister's car. The white luxury sedan she'd been driving since her engagement, the one my mother bragged about to the church ladies. $70,000 medical expenses, Shady Pines. I stared at that one, trying to place the name. Shady Pines. It sounded like a nursing home or memory care facility. But for who Rosa had died 17 years ago. My father was only 65 and, as far as I knew, healthy. The recent activity made my blood run cold. 3 months of missed payments, late fees compounding. And at the bottom of the activity log, a note in red, 17 failed login attempts in past 48 hours. IP address, 74.115.203.89. I pulled up an IP lookup tool, my hands moving on autopilot, now my financial advisor brain taking over. I entered the numbers and waited. Hartford, Connecticut. Residential address. The exact neighborhood where my parents lived. Someone had been trying to hack into this account. Desperately. 17 times in 2 days. They knew the account existed. They knew there was money in it. And they were locked out. I took screenshots of everything. The trust document, the HELOC, the transaction history, the failed login attempts. I saved them to 3 different cloud drives and emailed them to myself. Whatever happened next, I needed proof. My phone lit up on the table, Mom calling. 24th call. I watched it ring, watched my mother's name flash on the screen, and I let it go to voicemail just like the 23 before it. I wasn't ready to hear her voice. I wasn't ready to hear whatever lie she'd prepared to explain why she'd seated me at the kids' table, why she'd spent years treating me like an inconvenience. The voicemail notification appeared. I didn't listen to it. 30 seconds later, my laptop pinged with a new email. The subject line was in all caps, "Fraud alert, immediate action required." I clicked it open, my pulse hammering in my ears. Unauthorized login attempt detected using your social security number. Someone attempted to add themselves as co-trustee on account ending in 7743. For your security, we have locked this account. Click here to verify your identity and secure your account immediately. My mother wasn't just trying to access the money. She was trying to add herself to the trust. She was trying to rewrite history to insert herself into a legal document that had been specifically designed to keep her out. And she'd used my social security number to do it. I clicked the link and began the verification process. My mind already 3 steps ahead, already calculating what this meant, what came next, what I was going to have to do to protect what Rosa had spent 20 years building. Outside the diner window, the snow was falling harder now, and somewhere back in Connecticut, my phone was probably ringing again in my mother's hands unanswered while she realized that her daughter had finally stopped playing along. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table in Boston, laptop open, watching the security logs refresh every few minutes, documenting each new attempt to breach the account. By 3 a.m, I'd drunk an entire pot of coffee and made a list of everything I needed to do. At the top, underlined twice, call the bank the moment they open. At exactly 7 o'clock on Christmas morning, I dialed Chase Bank's fraud department. The representative who answered sounded tired, probably pulling holiday shift duty, but her voice sharpened the moment I explained the situation. "I'm the co-trustee of the Rosa Delgado Trust." I said, my tone calm and precise, every word measured. "I have evidence of attempted unauthorized access and possible identity theft. Someone has been trying to log into this account using my social security number. I need to freeze all accounts immediately and require in-person verification with photo ID for any future changes." There was a pause, the sound of rapid typing. "Account number ending in 7743. Yes. Ma'am, we're seeing the attempted logins too. Multiple failed attempts over the past 72 hours, and yes, someone did try to submit documentation to add a new trustee. We rejected it due to irregularities in the notarization, but we were about to contact you anyway. This account has been flagged for investigation." Relief flooded through me, though I kept my voice steady. "What happens now?" "We're placing an immediate freeze on all activity. No withdrawals, no transfers, no changes to account structure. Nothing moves without your physical signature on a notarized statement presented in person at a branch with 2 forms of government-issued ID. We'll also be referring this to our fraud investigation team and possibly law enforcement depending on what we find." "Perfect. Do it." I spent the next hour changing every password, security question, and access protocol. I enabled 2-factor authentication, set up alerts for any activity, and created a separate email address that only I knew about for account notifications. By the time I finished, the sun was rising over Boston, casting gold light across my apartment, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. But I wasn't done. Not even close. The strategic part of my brain, the part that had built a successful career by staying 3 steps ahead of everyone else, kicked into high gear. I could have called my mother right then. I could have confronted her, screamed at her, demanded explanations. But that would have tipped my hand. She'd know I'd found the trust documents. She'd know I was watching. She'd stop trying to access the account, maybe destroy evidence, definitely lawyer up. So instead, I watched. I set up a dashboard on my laptop that showed real-time login attempts complete with timestamps, IP addresses, and device fingerprints. Over the next 48 hours, I documented everything. My mother tried to access the account 17 more times. Each attempt came from the same IP address in Hartford. Each one failed. Each one was automatically logged by the bank's security system as a potential fraud event. On the second day, something new appeared in the activity log, an uploaded document. Someone had tried to submit a power of attorney, a legal form, claiming that Richard Vega authorized Gloria Martinez Vega to manage all his financial assets on his behalf. The document had my father's signature at the bottom, notarized and dated December 26th. Except my father had been with family all day on the 26th. I knew because Elena had posted 17 Instagram photos of their cozy family Christmas, all time-stamped. My father appeared in 8 of them wearing the same sweater in every shot, sitting in the same living room chair. He hadn't left the house. He certainly hadn't gone to a notary public. The bank had rejected the document automatically. Their fraud detection system flagged it because the notary license number didn't match Connecticut's public database. Someone had forged not just my father's signature, but the notary's credentials too. I screenshot everything, every login attempt, every failed password entry, every piece of uploaded documentation. I saved it all to 3 separate cloud drives with different providers, emailed encrypted copies to myself, and printed hard copies that I locked in my fireproof safe. Whatever happened next, I had evidence. Not just of financial impropriety, but of systematic, intentional fraud. My mother wasn't making mistakes. She was committing crimes. And she had no idea I was watching every single move. On December 27th, at exactly 11:43 at night, I sent my mother a text message, 6 words, no punctuation except a period. Stop trying to sign for me. I didn't elaborate. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain how I knew or what I'd found. Just a simple boundary stated as fact. Her response came within 90 seconds, a wall of text that I could practically hear in her voice. I don't know what you're talking about. Why are you being so cold? It's Christmas. Your father is asking for you. He's very upset that you left without saying goodbye. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. The least you could do is call him back. This is not how family treats each other. I raised you better than this. I read it once. Then I turned off my phone. Over the next 6 hours, she called 14 times. I know because when I turned my phone back on in the morning, there were 14 voicemail notifications, each one probably escalating from confusion to anger to whatever manipulation she'd settled on as her final strategy. I didn't listen to any of them. Instead, I blocked her number. Not out of spite, but out of strategy. Every time she tried to reach me and couldn't, she'd get more desperate, more reckless. And desperate, reckless people make mistakes. The silence was its own kind of power. For 37 years, I'd been trained to respond immediately to my mother's demands to soothe her ego, to make myself smaller so she could feel bigger. But now, for the first time in my life, I simply refused to engage. I see you, that silence said. I know what you're doing, and I'm not afraid of you anymore. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and began drafting a timeline of events complete with documentation. This wasn't anger. This wasn't revenge. This was preparation. When the time came to act, I would do so with precision, with evidence, with the cold clarity of someone who'd finally stopped letting love be weaponized against her. At 8:15 in the morning on December 28th, I heard something slide under my apartment door. I wasn't expecting mail. I walked over and found a cream-colored envelope on the floor, my name written across the front in elegant, old-fashioned cursive. Inside was a handwritten note on thick cardstock. Your grandmother told me to give this to you if this day ever came. Mrs. Whitaker, 428 Maple Street. Beneath the note was a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, clearly very old. I opened it carefully and found a hand-drawn map of the house on Maple Street, every room labeled in Rosa's precise handwriting. 3 locations were circled in red ink: the living room bookshelf, the basement behind the water heater, and the attic inside, something labeled wooden dove box. At the bottom in Rosa's hand, one final instruction: truth is never in one place, mija. Gather it like I gathered my courage. I stared at that map for a long time, understanding flooding through me. My grandmother had known this day would come. She'd prepared for it. And now from beyond the grave, she was showing me exactly where to look for the weapons I'd need to fight back. I was still holding the map when my doorbell rang 20 minutes later. I looked through the peephole and saw an elderly woman I hadn't seen in years standing in the hallway with both hands clutching a large leather purse. Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker, my grandmother's next-door neighbor. The woman who used to bring us homemade cookies and let me read on her porch swing during the 2 years I lived with Rosa. I opened the door stunned. "Mrs. Whitaker." She smiled, though her eyes were tired. "Hello, Amanda dear. I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I drove up from Hartford this morning. 4 hours at my age is no small thing, but your grandmother made me promise, and I don't break promises to the dead." I ushered her inside, took her coat, and made tea while she settled into my small living room. She looked around approvingly at my bookshelves, the framed diplomas on the wall, the tidy functionality of a life built on discipline and hard work. "Rosa would be proud of this," she said, accepting the teacup. "She always said you'd build something solid, something that couldn't be taken away." I sat across from her, the map still in my hands. "How did you know to bring this now?" Mrs. Whitaker took a slow sip of tea, gathering her thoughts the way elderly people do when they're about to tell you something that matters. "Your grandmother gave me that envelope in 2004, a year before she died. She was very specific about the instructions. She said, 'Eleanor, if Amanda ever comes back angry, give her this immediately. If she comes back sad, wait one more day. If she comes back silent, it's time.'" Mrs. Whitaker looked at me with knowing eyes. "I've been watching you since Christmas Eve, dear. I saw you leave that restaurant. I saw you drive past the house on Maple Street twice without stopping. You weren't angry. You weren't sad. You were silent. And silence, your grandmother said, meant you were finally ready to fight the right way." My throat tightened. Rosa had known me so completely that even 2 decades after living with her, even 20 years after her death, she could predict exactly how I'd respond to betrayal. Not with tantrums or tears, but with the quiet, methodical gathering of facts. The kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. I unfolded the map again, studying the 3 red circles more carefully now. The detail was extraordinary. Rosa had drawn every room, every window, every piece of furniture she thought might still be there. Her handwriting was steady, the lines precise despite her age when she'd drawn this. "What is she trying to show me?" I asked. Mrs. Whitaker leaned forward, pointing to the first circle. "The living room bookshelf. 3rd shelf from the top behind the Bible. There's a false back panel. Your grandmother kept important documents there, things Gloria never thought to look for because she didn't value books the way Rosa did." She moved her finger to the 2nd circle. "The basement behind the water heater. 4th row of bricks is loose. Rosa hid something there when she first bought the house long before any of this started." Her finger traced to the 3rd circle. "And the attic, inside the wooden Dove music box that belonged to Rosa's mother. That one's special. She told me once that her mother gave her that box the day she left the Dominican Republic. She said it held the only proof of who she really was." At the bottom of the map, Rosa's final instructions seemed to glow in the lamplight. "Truth is never in one place, mija. You must gather it like I gathered my courage piece by piece. Don't fight with rage. Fight with evidence. They worship image. Show them their reflection." I read those words 3 times, feeling Rosa's voice in my head as clearly as if she were sitting beside me. She hadn't just left me money or property. She'd left me a strategy, a philosophy, a way to fight that honored who I was, instead of trying to make me into someone louder, angrier, more like the people who'd hurt me. Mrs. Whitaker's voice softened. "She cried the night she drew that map, you know. I was there. We were having tea in her kitchen, and she just started weeping right there at the table. She said, 'I love Gloria, but I cannot trust her. She's been poisoned by insecurity since childhood, and I don't know how to heal her. So instead, I must protect Amanda.' It broke her heart, dear, having to choose, but she said you were the strongest person she'd ever known." I looked up sharply. "Strong, I was just a kid when she knew me." "Strong," Mrs. Whitaker repeated firmly. "She said you chose kindness even when cruelty was easier. That when Gloria hurt you, you didn't become cruel in return. You just became quieter, steadier. And that's the kind of strength that lasts." She paused, her weathered hands wrapped around the teacup. "Rosa wanted you to inherit the house not because of blood, but because you understand what it means to be powerless, and still choose dignity. She said that's what the house should represent. A place where powerless people learn they have worth. I felt tears threatening but blinked them back. I wish she'd told me all this while she was alive. She couldn't, dear. Not without forcing a confrontation she wasn't ready for. Gloria was her daughter, adopted or not. Rosa loved her, but love doesn't mean trust, and your grandmother understood that distinction better than most. Mrs. Whitaker set down her teacup and began to gather her things. I should get back on the road before traffic gets bad, but I promised Rosa I'd deliver that map when the time came, and I've kept my word. I walked her to the door, helped her with her coat. She was halfway into the hallway when she paused and turned back as if remembering something important. "One more thing, dear." She pointed to the signature at the bottom of the map. "Your grandmother's name. She signed it Rosa Delgado, not Rosa Vega. After 40 years of marriage to your grandfather, she never took his name. Did you ever wonder why?" I looked down at the map at that signature I'd glanced past without thinking. Rosa Delgado. Her maiden name. The name she'd carried from the Dominican Republic, the name she'd kept through decades of American life when most immigrant women anglicized everything they could. "No," I admitted. "I never thought about it." Mrs. Whitaker's expression grew serious, almost solemn. "Ask yourself why a woman who loved her husband would refuse to take his name. Ask yourself what she was protecting. And when you find what she hid in those 3 places, I think you'll understand." She left then, her footsteps echoing down the hallway, and I stood in my doorway holding a map to secrets I didn't yet understand, drawn by a woman who'd known exactly what war I'd be fighting 20 years after her death. The drive to Hartford took 2 hours through light morning traffic, but my mind was racing so fast that I barely noticed the miles passing. Mrs. Whitaker's words echoed in my head. Ask yourself why a woman who loved her husband would refuse to take his name. Ask yourself what she was protecting. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of Citizens Bank on Main Street, I'd run through a dozen theories, each one darker than the last. The bank had reopened on December 28th after the Christmas closure, and I arrived at 9:15 with everything I needed: the trust documents from Lawrence Mitchell's email, my driver's license, my passport, and the small brass key that had been tucked into Mrs. Whitaker's envelope. The key was old, tarnished at the edges, with the number 237 stamped into the metal. The bank manager, a woman in her 50s named Patricia Chen, studied my documents with careful attention. She cross-referenced the trust agreement against her computer records, compared my signature to the one on file, and finally nodded with professional satisfaction. "Ms. Vega, you are indeed listed as co-trustee with access rights to safe deposit box 237. According to our records, this box hasn't been opened since March 2005. She looked up, her expression softening. "That's almost 20 years. My grandmother died in March 2005. I said quietly. "I see. Well, you have full legal access. Follow me, please." She led me down a narrow hallway to the vault, a heavy steel door that required 2 keys to open. Inside, the walls were lined with small brass doors, each one numbered. Patricia located box 237, inserted her master key, waited for me to insert mine, and together we turned them. The door swung open, revealing a long metal drawer. "I'll give you privacy," Patricia said. "There's a room just down the hall. Take all the time you need." I pulled out the drawer. It was heavier than I expected, packed full. Inside, I found a thick manila folder, its edges worn soft with age. Beneath it lay a cassette tape wrapped carefully in white cloth, a rosary with wooden beads, several photographs in protective sleeves, and a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in Rosa's unmistakable handwriting, Amanda Rosa Vega. My hands were shaking as I carried everything to the private room Patricia had indicated. The space was small and windowless, just a table, 2 chairs, and a lamp. I sat down, spread the contents out before me, and took a breath before opening the folder. The first document made my vision blur at the edges. Certificate of Adoption. Commonwealth of Massachusetts, 1963. Gloria Martinez, age 2 years, adopted by Rosa Delgado, age 19. Single mother from Santo Domingo Orphanage, Dominican Republic. Adoption finalized August 14, 1963. Gloria was adopted. My mother was adopted. Rosa wasn't her biological mother. I read it 3 times each time, hoping I'd misunderstood, but the words didn't change. Gloria Martinez orphan, taken in by a teenage Rosa who'd barely been an adult herself. I tried to picture my grandmother at 19 alone in a new country choosing to adopt a child when she could barely take care of herself. It was an act of staggering generosity or staggering loneliness. Maybe both. I set that document aside with trembling fingers and reached for the next one. Birth certificate, State of Connecticut, 1989. Amanda Rosa Vega, born March 3, 1989, to Maria Delgado and Richard Vega. Maria Delgado, not Gloria Vega. Maria. I stared at that name, trying to make sense of it, and then I saw the notation at the bottom. Mother deceased June 12, 1989. Cause automobile accident. Maria had died 3 months after I was born. And Maria's last name was Delgado. Rosa's last name, which meant Maria was Rosa's sister, or daughter. Or, I found the answer in the next document, a family tree hand-drawn by Rosa with careful dates and relationships mapped out. Maria Delgado, born 1967, was Rosa's younger sister, 22 years younger. Almost like a daughter, but not. Rosa had been 18 when Maria was born. Their parents had died when Maria was 13, and Rosa, already in America, had sent money home until Maria could join her in 1985. Maria had met my father, Rick Vega, in 1988. They'd married quickly. I was born the following year. And then Maria died in a car accident, leaving behind an infant daughter and a devastated husband. The next document showed that Rick married Gloria Vega in 1990, just 1 year after Maria's death. Gloria, who was Rosa's adopted daughter, who was biologically no relation to me at all. And then the final piece, Adoption Decree 1991. Rosa Delgado legally adopted Amanda Rosa Vega, her biological niece, at age 2, with Richard Vega's consent. The reason listed: to ensure legal protection and guardianship in the event of father's incapacity or death. My entire understanding of family collapsed and rebuilt itself in the space of 5 minutes. Gloria wasn't my mother by blood. She was my adoptive mother, Rosa's adopted daughter, who'd married my biological father after my biological mother died. I was Rosa's niece, her actual blood. The only direct biological descendant of Rosa Delgado still living. And Gloria had known. She must have known. You don't raise a child for 37 years without knowing they're not biologically yours. I pushed the adoption papers aside and reached deeper into the folder, finding 2 more documents that made my blood run cold. 2 versions of Rosa's last will and testament. The first, dated April 2005, was properly notarized with witness signatures. It stated clearly, the property at 428 Maple Street, Hartford, Connecticut is held in trust for Richard Vega and Amanda Vega as co-trustees. Gloria Vega is not a beneficiary. The second version was dated September 2008, 3 years after Rosa's death. This one claimed, all property and assets transfer entirely to Gloria Martinez Vega upon my death. I held them side by side under the lamp. The signatures were completely different. The 2005 signature was Rosa's steady, confident hand, the same signature I'd seen on birthday cards and school permission slips. The 2008 signature was shaky, cramped wrong. Someone had tried to forge Rosa's handwriting 3 years after she died, and they'd done a terrible job of it. My mother had created a fake will. The final item in the folder was the cassette tape wrapped in cloth like something sacred. The label read, "For Amanda, play this if she says she burned the truth." I went back to Patricia's desk and asked if they had a cassette player. She looked surprised but returned a few minutes later with an old boombox from the break room. "We keep it for exactly these situations," she said kindly. Families hide the strangest things. I returned to the private room, closed the door, and inserted the tape. There was a long stretch of hissing static, and then Rosa's voice filled the small space so clear and familiar that my eyes immediately filled with tears. "Mija, if you're hearing this, Gloria has done what I feared most. She's tried to take what isn't hers, and she's told you lies to justify it. I need you to know the truth. The whole truth, even the parts that make me look bad." A pause. The sound of Rosa taking a breath. "Gloria is not my biological daughter. I adopted her when I was 19 and stupid and lonely. Your real mother was my sister Maria, who died when you were just a baby. I've loved Gloria her whole life, but I've also known she's been poisoned by the fear that she's not really mine, that she doesn't really belong. I tried to fix it. I tried to make her feel—" The tape suddenly screeched, the audio warping into static and then silence. I frantically pressed buttons, rewound, tried again. Nothing. The tape had degraded or been damaged, and the rest of Rosa's message was gone. But in those final seconds beneath the static, I heard one last fragment of Rosa's voice. "Go to St. Catherine's Church. Father Thompson has the second half of this recording. Don't trust anyone else. And Mija Gloria isn't the villain of this story. She's the saddest casualty. The real villain is the lie I told to keep the peace." The tape went silent. I sat in that windowless room, surrounded by the wreckage of 3 generations of secrets, and understood that whatever Rosa had been trying to tell me the truth was still hidden, still waiting in the one place my family had always pretended to find salvation. I drove back to Boston in a daze, the documents from the safe deposit box secure in my briefcase, Rosa's broken recording playing over and over in my mind. By the time I reached my apartment, it was late afternoon, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. This wasn't about anger anymore. This was about building an airtight case that would leave no room for my mother to lie, manipulate, or deflect. I needed professionals. I needed evidence that would hold up not just in my own mind, but in a court of law if it came to that. The first call I made was to Dr. Rebecca Hartman, a forensic document examiner I'd heard speak at a financial fraud conference 3 years earlier. She specialized in handwriting analysis, signature authentication, and historical document verification. When I explained what I had, she agreed to see me the next morning. I arrived at her office in Cambridge at 9 o'clock sharp, carrying both versions of Rosa's will in protective sleeves. Dr. Hartman was in her 60s with steel gray hair and the kind of precise, methodical manner that inspired immediate confidence. She examined both documents under magnification, took detailed photographs, and made notes in a leather-bound journal. "Preliminary assessment," she said after 20 minutes. "The 2008 signature is almost certainly forged. The stroke patterns are inconsistent with the authenticated 2005 signature. See here." She pointed to the capital R in Rosa's name. "The pressure points are wrong. Your grandmother formed her letters with consistent rightward slant and heavy downstrokes. This signature shows leftward pull and uneven pressure, suggesting someone right-handed trying to mimic a left-handed writer's style or someone copying slowly rather than writing naturally." She looked up at me. "I can provide a full forensic analysis with statistical probability. Based on what I'm seeing now, I'd estimate 94% probability of forgery. That will hold up in court." "How long will the full analysis take?" 1 week. I'll need to examine paper composition, ink dating, and compare against multiple authenticated samples. But Ms. Vega, this is clear-cut. Whoever forged this did a poor job." My second appointment was with Martin Weiss, an estate attorney whose reputation for handling complex trust disputes was legendary in Boston legal circles. His office overlooked the harbor, all dark wood and leather-bound law books. I spread the documents across his desk and watched him read with the focused intensity of someone who'd seen every possible variation of family betrayal. "Connecticut law is very clear on this," he said finally. "The 2005 will is valid, properly witnessed, properly notarized, executed, while your grandmother was demonstrably of sound mind. The 2008 version is void on multiple grounds. It was created after the testator's death. It lacks proper witnesses, and based on what you've told me about the forensic analysis, it's fraudulent. Any probate court will recognize the 2005 document as controlling. He leaned back in his chair. But Ms. Vega, if your mother has been using a forged will to claim ownership and has taken out a HELOC against property she doesn't legally own, we're talking about multiple felonies, forgery fraud, identity theft. Are you prepared for this to become criminal? I'm prepared to protect what my grandmother left me, I said. Whatever that takes. Innie nodded slowly. Then we'll prepare a comprehensive legal filing. But I'd recommend trying mediation first. Give your mother a chance to make this right before we bring in prosecutors. The final piece was the private investigator. I hired Marcus Chen, a former FBI agent, who now ran a boutique investigation firm specializing in financial crimes. I gave him one task: find out everything about the $70,000 marked medical expenses, Shady Pines, in the HELOC records. He called me back 48 hours later with a report that made my stomach turn. Your father was admitted to Shady Pines Memory Care Facility in March 2024. Marcus said, his voice professionally neutral. Diagnosis: early onset dementia, possible Alzheimer's disease. He stayed there for 8 months. Total cost of care, $68,000. The facility provides excellent care specialized in cognitive decline, and according to their records, your father was making progress. They had him on a medication regimen, he was participating in therapy, and his lucid periods were increasing. So why did he leave? He didn't choose to leave. Your mother withdrew him against medical advice on November 18th, 3 weeks before Christmas. The facility strongly recommended he stay. The discharge notes are pretty damning. Let me read you the relevant section. Patient's wife insisted on taking him home, despite our medical recommendation for continued care. Wife signed AMA form. We advised against this decision, given patient's ongoing confusion and wandering behavior. Patient is not safe to be home without 24-hour supervision. I closed my eyes. Let me guess. She hasn't paid them. The unpaid balance of $68,000 has been sent to collections. They've been trying to reach her for 6 weeks. So that's what happened. My father had dementia. He'd been getting treatment, and my mother had pulled him out not because he was better, but because she couldn't afford to keep him there. She'd already drained the HELOC for Elena's wedding and car. She had no way to pay for his care. So she brought him home, hid his condition from everyone, and started forging his signature on legal documents while his mind deteriorated. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Not just what she'd done to me, but what she'd done to him. My father, who'd been weak but never malicious, was now trapped in a failing mind, while his wife used his confusion to steal. By December 31st, I had everything I needed: forensic proof of forgery, legal confirmation of the valid will, evidence of my father's condition, and my mother's exploitation of it. I could have gone straight to court. I could have filed criminal charges. But something in Rosa's broken recording stopped me. Gloria isn't the villain of this story. She's the saddest casualty. I decided to offer mercy first. One chance to make this right before I brought the full weight of the law down on her. I called Father Thompson at St. Catherine's Church and arranged a family meeting for January 3rd. Neutral ground. A mediator. A chance for Gloria to confess to return what she'd taken to let my father get the care he needed. I prepared 2 folders. One contained my mercy offer terms for restitution, a payment plan, no criminal charges if she cooperated. The other contained legal filings ready to submit to the Hartford County Prosecutor's Office, complete with all evidence. Which folder I'd use depended entirely on what my mother chose to do. I was in bed at 2:47 in the morning on January 1st when my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? Amanda. The voice was male, trembling, frightened. It's Dad. I'm calling from the neighbor's phone. Your mother can't know. Please, honey, I need help. My heart stopped. Dad, are you okay? I can't remember what I signed. His voice broke. She keeps putting papers in front of me, and I sign them because she tells me I already agreed, but I don't remember agreeing. I think I did something terrible. Amanda, I think I helped her steal from you. Can you come get me? Please. I don't feel safe here anymore. I was already reaching for my keys. I'm coming right now. Don't let her know you called. Can you meet me outside? I'll try. I'll wait by the back door. Amanda. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, Dad. I know. I'm on my way. I hung up, grabbed my coat, and ran for my car. Whatever meeting I'd planned, whatever mercy I'd intended to offer, it didn't matter anymore. My father was asking for help, and this time I wasn't going to let him down. I made the 2-hour drive in 90 minutes, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my father's frightened voice echoing in my head. The roads were empty at 3 a.m, just me and the occasional truck, the highway lights streaking past like falling stars. I kept replaying what he'd said. I think I did something terrible. I think I helped her steal from you. The guilt in his voice had been worse than any accusation my mother had ever thrown at me. I pulled onto Maple Street at 4:15, the neighborhood silent and dark except for scattered porch lights left on for security. I parked 2 blocks away, killed my headlights, and approached the house on foot through the Kowalski's backyard, the same route I'd used as a teenager when I'd sneak back after curfew. The snow from Christmas Eve had mostly melted, leaving wet grass that soaked through my sneakers. My father was waiting by the back door exactly as he'd promised, and the sight of him nearly broke me. He wore striped pajama bottoms and a heavy winter coat that hung off his frame like he'd lost 30 pounds. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, and he was shaking, though I couldn't tell if it was from cold or fear or both. This was not the man I remembered. My father had always been solid, if not strong, reliable, if not brave. But the person standing before me looked like a ghost of himself, decades older than his 65 years. "Mandy," he whispered, and his voice cracked on my childhood nickname. "You came." "Of course I came, Dad." I reached for him and he collapsed against me, his body trembling. "Let's get you warm. My car's 2 blocks away." "I told Eleanor I needed to borrow her phone," he said as we walked quickly through the dark yard. "Gloria took mine away last month. She said I kept losing it, but I think she just didn't want me calling anyone. She told me you didn't want to talk to me anymore. She said you were too busy with your important life to care about your old parents." The casual cruelty of it made me sick. I helped him into this passenger seat, turned the heat up to full blast, and pulled away from the curb before anyone could see us. Only when we were safely on the highway did I let myself speak. "Dad, I never said that. I've been waiting for you to call me for years." He turned to look at me, confusion and pain written across his face. "But Gloria said—" "I know what she said. She was lying." He started to cry, then quietly his hands covering his face. "I signed so many papers, Amanda. She kept putting them in front of me. She'd say they were for refinancing for Elena's wedding, for my medical bills. I didn't understand them. The words would swim on the page. My memory, it's like trying to hold water. I know I had thoughts, I know I understood things, but then they just slip away and I can't get them back." I reached over and took his hand. It felt small and cold, nothing like the strong hands that used to lift me up when I was little. "She told me I gave her power of attorney back in 2020. He continued, his voice steadier now. "She said it was to protect the family if anything happened to me. I remember signing something then when I could still think clearly. But recently she's been doing something different. She brings me papers when I'm confused, when I've just woken up, or when I can't remember what day it is. She says, 'You already agreed to this, remember? You just need to sign again because the bank needs a fresh copy.' And I sign because I don't want to make her angry and because I can't remember if I really did agree or not. Dad, she's been using your condition to forge your signature on documents. You didn't do anything wrong. She did." He looked at me with desperate hope. "She tells me you abandoned us, that you're trying to steal our home, that you haven't called in years because you think I'm embarrassing. Is that true?" "Mandy, did I do something to make you hate me?" The question shattered something inside me. "No, Dad. I never abandoned you. I never thought you were embarrassing. I've been waiting for you to call me to tell me you needed help. But she kept us apart. She lied to both of us." He nodded slowly, processing this. Then he straightened up, something focusing in his eyes. "There's a box. I hid it when I could still think clearly enough to know I was losing my mind. It's in my workshop under the floorboard beneath the workbench. I can't remember exactly what's in it, but I knew even then that someday I'd need proof. That someday someone would call me a liar and I'd need to show them I wasn't." "We need to get it," I said immediately. "We have to go back. Right now, before she realizes you're gone." We drove back in silence, parked in the same spot, and crept through the dark house. The basement stairs creaked under our weight, each sound impossibly loud in the sleeping house. Rick's workshop was exactly as I remembered it. Tools hung in neat rows, sawdust on the floor, the smell of wood and machine oil. He pointed to the workbench with a trembling finger. I knelt down and felt along the floorboards until I found one that was loose. I pried it up with a screwdriver from his toolbox, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside was a fireproof document box, the kind you buy at office supply stores. I lifted it out, my heart pounding. Inside were papers carefully organized in plastic sleeves. Rick's original will, dated 2019, leaving everything to Amanda Rosa Vega. Medical records from Shady Pines documenting his diagnosis: early onset dementia, Alzheimer's disease, prescribed medications, treatment notes. And folded on top a piece of lined notebook paper, covered in my father's handwriting, shaky but legible. The note was addressed to himself. "Rick, if you're reading this, it's because you can't trust your own memory anymore. Here's what you need to know. Amanda is innocent. She never abandoned you. Gloria has been lying to you. Gloria is stealing from Amanda. If someone shows you this note, believe them. Believe Amanda. You wrote this on October 15th, 2024, while you still knew what was real. Trust yourself. Trust your daughter." I looked up at my father, tears streaming down my face. "You knew? Even when your mind was failing, you knew." "I had moments," he said softly. "Little windows where everything was clear. I used them to protect you the only way I could." We were halfway up the basement stairs when the lights upstairs blazed on. Footsteps crossed the kitchen floor. My mother's voice, sharp with worry and anger, called out, "Rick! Rick, where are you? It's 4:30 in the morning. Why are you out of bed?" I froze on the stairs, the document box clutched to my chest. My father's hand found mine in the darkness. "Let me handle this," he whispered. "Go out the side door. I'll tell her I was confused, that I thought I heard something and came down to check. But Amanda listened to me. She's planning something. I heard her on the phone yesterday. She said the court date is January 8th. I don't know what it means, but please protect yourself. Don't trust her. Don't trust anything she says." He squeezed my hand once, then climbed the stairs toward my mother's voice, leaving me in the shadows with the evidence that would destroy her. I got my father safely to a hotel outside Hartford, checked him in under my name, and stayed with him until he fell asleep in the chair by the window, exhausted and confused, but finally safe. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the other bed, watching him breathe the document box from his workshop on the nightstand like a ticking bomb. By the time dawn broke on January 2nd, I'd already decided what came next. I would take him to a proper neurologist, get him the care he needed, and deal with whatever legal nightmare my mother was preparing. The nightmare arrived at 10:30 that morning via courier. I was in the hotel lobby getting coffee when a man in a blue uniform approached me. "Amanda Vega." "Yes. You've been served." He handed me a thick manila envelope and walked away before I could respond. Inside were 2 sets of legal documents, both filed in Hartford Probate Court, both dated January 2nd. My hand started shaking as I read the first one. Petition for temporary restraining order. Gloria Martinez Vega petitioner versus Amanda Rosa Vega respondent. The language was cold and clinical, designed to make me sound like a predator. Respondent unlawfully removed Richard Vega from his residence on January 1st, 2025, without notice or consent. Respondent has isolated Mr. Vega from his family and is exploiting his diminished mental capacity for financial gain. Petitioner requests immediate court intervention to protect vulnerable adult from further exploitation. The second document was worse. Emergency petition for full guardianship. Gloria was asking the court to grant her complete legal authority over my father's medical, financial, and personal decisions. If she won, my father would have no autonomy. He wouldn't be able to make any choices about his own life. He'd be legally declared incompetent, and my mother would control everything. The hearing was scheduled for January 8th, 6 days away. She'd beaten me to court. While I'd been gathering evidence and planning a mediated resolution, my mother had gone straight to a judge and painted me as the villain. The legal system moves slowly unless you file an emergency petition, and that's exactly what she'd done. She was using my father's condition, my midnight rescue, and my own attempts to help him as weapons against me. I called Martin Weiss from the hotel parking lot, my voice steadier than I felt. She filed first, restraining order and guardianship petition. Hearing is January 8th. I just got the notification, he said. Don't panic, we expected this. She's trying to control the narrative, but we have evidence she doesn't know we have. I'm filing our counterpetition today. We'll request an emergency protective order against her for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. We'll also file for an independent medical evaluation of your father. The court will want to hear from a neutral expert, not just your mother's claims. Martin, she's saying I kidnapped him. You didn't kidnap him. He called you asking for help. Do you still have that phone record? I checked my call log. Unknown number 2:47 a.m., January 1st. Yes. Perfect. We'll subpoena Mrs. Whitaker to testify that your father borrowed her phone to call you. That proves he initiated contact, not you. But Amanda, I need to warn you, this is going to get ugly. Your mother is claiming you're exploiting your father. You're going to have to prove she's the actual exploiter. Are you ready for that? I have his medical records from Shady Pines. I have proof she withdrew him against medical advice. I have bank records showing she's been draining the trust fund. Then we fight. I'll have everything filed by end of business today. I hung up and checked my phone, and that's when I saw it. A Facebook notification. Someone had tagged me in a post. Elena had written, "Some people abandon their families for years, then swoop in pretending to care when there's money on the line. My father is sick and vulnerable, and certain individuals are taking advantage of him. Family protects each other, they don't manipulate the elderly, praying for truth to prevail." No names, but everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. The post had been shared 47 times. The comments were brutal. So sad. Some people have no shame. Your poor parents. They gave her everything. I always knew Amanda was cold. This proves it. Praying for your family. Gold diggers are the worst. My hometown was turning against me in real time. People who'd watched me grow up, who'd known Rosa, who should have known better, were sharing my sister's post and adding their own judgments. My mother wasn't just attacking me in court. She was destroying my reputation, making sure that even if I won legally, I'd lose socially. In a small town like Hartford, that kind of damage was hard to recover from. I wanted to respond. I wanted to screenshot the bank records, the forged will, the medical records, and post everything publicly. But Martin had warned me, never fight on social media. Judges hate it. Stay silent. Let your evidence speak in court. Stämmen. So I closed Facebook and focused on what I could control. By 5 o'clock that evening, Martin had filed 3 documents, a counterpetition for an emergency protective order against Gloria for financial exploitation, a request for independent medical evaluation of Rick's mental capacity, and a motion to dismiss Gloria's guardianship petition on the grounds that she was the exploiter, not the protector. We included evidence: the forged power of attorney, the failed login attempts, the HELOC records, and the medical discharge notes from Shady Pines. Now we wait, Martin said. The court will review both petitions and likely consolidate them into a single hearing on January 8th. You'll both present your cases, and the judge will decide who's telling the truth. I spent the rest of the evening with my father, who was having a particularly confused day. He didn't remember calling me. He didn't remember leaving the house. He kept asking where Gloria was and whether she was angry with him. I showed him the note he'd written to himself, and he read it 3 times, tears streaming down his face. I wrote this, "You did, Dad, when you were thinking clearly." I don't feel clear now. Everything's foggy. I know, but that's why we're going to get you help. Real help. At 11:30 that night, my laptop pinged with an email alert. Subject line, "Urgent action required." I opened it and my blood went cold. Trust account closure requested by Gloria Vega using newly filed power of attorney dated December 28, 2024. Signature of Richard Vega verified by Notary Public. Documents attached for review. Approve closure and fund transfer yes/no. You have 24 hours to respond before automatic approval. I clicked on the attachment. There it was, a power of attorney dated December 28th with my father's signature at the bottom and a notary seal from Connecticut. But on December 28th, my father had been with me. We'd driven to the bank together. We'd opened Rosa's safe deposit box together. He'd been 4 hours away from Connecticut, sitting in a bank in Hartford with me nowhere near a notary public. Someone had forged his signature again. And this time they'd forged the notary credentials too. I screenshot everything, forwarded it to Martin with the subject line, "She's trying again," and typed my response to the bank, "No, this is fraudulent. Legal action in progress. Do not approve." Then I called the number listed on the notary seal. It rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "Hello. Is this Susan Chen Notary, public license number 847392? "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Amanda Vega. According to a document I just received, you notarized a power of attorney for Richard Vega on December 28th. Is that correct?" There was a long pause. "I'd have to check my records. Can you call back during business hours?" "Ma'am, this is urgent. Did you meet Richard Vega in person on December 28th? Another pause, longer this time. "Listen, I don't want any trouble. A woman came to my office. She said her husband was homebound and couldn't travel. She had his ID, his signature, everything looked legitimate. I made a judgment call." "You notarized a document without the signer present." I shouldn't have. I know that." But she was very convincing. She said it was an emergency. I thanked her and hung up. My mother had found a notary willing to bend the rules, and now that notary was about to lose her license. But more importantly, I had her. On tape, admitting to notary fraud. The war my mother started was about to become very one-sided. The 6 days between receiving the legal documents and the hearing felt both endless and impossibly short. I spent them preparing with Martin, organizing evidence into clear chronological timelines, and taking care of my father, who cycled between lucid moments and profound confusion. On the morning of January 8th, I dressed in my most conservative navy suit, pulled my hair into a neat bun, and tried to ignore the sick feeling in my stomach. I'd spent my career advising people on financial strategy, but I'd never been on the receiving end of a courtroom battle. Everything I'd built, everything Rosa had tried to protect, came down to what happened in the next few hours. Hartford Probate Court was an imposing brick building downtown, all marble floors and echoing hallways that smelled like old paper and furniture polish. We arrived 15 minutes early, and Martin led us to courtroom 3B, where Judge Patricia Morrison would preside. She had a reputation for being sharp, no-nonsense, and deeply skeptical of family drama. That could work in my favor or against me, depending on who told the more convincing story. My mother arrived precisely at 9 o'clock with her attorney, a tall man in an expensive suit whose nameplate read Vincent Reyes. Gloria wore all black as if she were in mourning and carried tissues that she clutched in one hand like props. Her eyes were red, though whether from actual tears or careful makeup I couldn't tell. Elena followed behind her, looking uncomfortable in a gray dress, refusing to make eye contact with me. They took their seats on the opposite side of the courtroom, and the divide between us felt like a chasm. My father sat beside me with a court-appointed advocate, a kind-faced woman named Patricia who'd spent an hour with him earlier that week. He wore a suit I'd bought him 2 days ago because his old ones hung off his diminished frame. He kept looking around the courtroom with worried confusion, whispering, "Why are we here? Is this about taxes?" "It's okay, Dad," I whispered back. "Just sit tight. Everything's going to be fine." Judge Morrison entered, and we all stood. She was in her early 60s with steel gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She settled into her chair, reviewed the files before her, and looked up with an expression that suggested she'd already heard every variation of family betrayal and wasn't impressed by any of them. "This court will hear consolidated petitions regarding the guardianship and welfare of Richard Vega," she said crisply. "Mr. Reyes, you may present your case." Vincent Reyes stood buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of elder exploitation. Amanda Vega had minimal contact with her father for over 3 years. She did not visit, rarely called, and showed no interest in his well-being. Then on Christmas Eve, after a family dinner, she disappeared without explanation. 10 days later, she removed Mr. Vega from his home in the middle of the night without notice or consent from his wife. We believe Ms. Vega is manipulating her father's vulnerable cognitive state to access financial assets, specifically a trust fund worth nearly $1 million. Mrs. Gloria Vega, who has cared for her husband faithfully throughout his illness, seeks guardianship to protect him from further exploitation. I kept my face absolutely neutral, though rage was building in my chest. The lies were so smooth, so carefully constructed, that someone who didn't know the truth might actually believe them. Martin stood, and his voice was calm but cutting. "Your Honor, the respondent's narrative is not supported by evidence. In fact, the evidence shows the exact opposite, that Gloria Vega has been exploiting her husband's condition for financial gain and that Amanda Vega intervened to protect him." He opened the first binder and began systematically dismantling my mother's story. First, he showed hotel security footage from January 1st, time-stamped 5:30 in the morning. The video showed my father walking into the hotel lobby under his own power, looking around until he spotted me, and then his face breaking into a smile of relief. He hugged me. He wasn't being coerced. He was being rescued. Next came the medical records from Shady Pines Memory Care, complete with the damning discharge notes. Patient's wife insisted on taking him home despite our medical recommendation for continued care. Wife signed against medical advice form. We advised against this decision, given patient's ongoing confusion and wandering behavior. Martin highlighted the unpaid balance, $68,000 sent to collections because Gloria couldn't afford to keep my father in professional care. Then the bank logs showing 17 failed login attempts from my mother's IP address, each one documented with timestamps and device fingerprints. Martin projected them on a screen for the judge to see a clear pattern of someone desperately trying to access an account they had no legal right to touch. But the knockout blow was the power of attorney, dated December 28th. Martin placed 2 documents side by side, the fraudulent POA claiming my father had signed it in Connecticut, and the hotel receipt showing my father had been with me in Hartford that day, 4 hours away, checking into a hotel at 2 in the afternoon and having dinner with me at 6. Impossible to be in 2 places at once. "Your Honor," Martin said, "this document is a forgery. Mr. Vega could not have signed it in Connecticut because he was nowhere near Connecticut. And the notary who certified this document has already admitted in a recorded phone call that she never met Mr. Vega in person." Judge Morrison's expression shifted from neutral to something harder. "Is the notary present?" "Yes, Your Honor. We've subpoenaed her." Linda Chen was called to the stand. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, and she looked terrified. Her hands shook as she was sworn in. "Ms. Chen," Martin said gently, "did you notarize a power of attorney for Richard Vega on December 28, 2024? "I did," she said quietly. "Did you meet Mr. Vega in person?" A long pause. "No." "Then how did you notarize his signature?" Her voice was barely audible. "Mrs. Vega came to my office. She brought the papers and said her husband was homebound and very ill. She had his ID, she had what looked like his signature, everything seemed legitimate. She was very upset, very convincing. She said it was an emergency, that they needed this done immediately to protect their assets. I made a judgment call. I shouldn't have. I know that now. But she assured me he'd already signed it at home and I just needed to certify it. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her voice sharp. Ms. Chen, you are aware that notarizing a document without the signer present is a criminal violation of Connecticut law. Linda Chen started to cry. Yes, Your Honor, I'm so sorry. Mrs. Vega was very persuasive. She kept saying her husband was dying and they needed this urgently. I thought I was helping. You were breaking the law, the judge said coldly. We will be referring this matter to the state's attorney. You may step down. The courtroom was silent, except for Linda Chen's quiet sobbing as she returned to her seat. Finally, Martin called Dr. Helen Rodriguez, the independent medical examiner the court had appointed. She was calm, professional, unshakable. I evaluated Mr. Richard Vega on January 5th. He presents with moderate cognitive impairment consistent with early-stage Alzheimer's disease. While he has periods of clarity, he lacks the capacity to make complex financial or legal decisions. He should not be signing contracts, legal documents, or making major financial choices without oversight from a guardian or advocate. He is vulnerable to manipulation. Judge Morrison removed her glasses and addressed the courtroom. I've heard enough. The power of attorney dated December 28th is void due to notary fraud and lack of proper execution. Mrs. Gloria Vega's petition for guardianship is denied. The evidence clearly shows she removed Mr. Vega from appropriate medical care, attempted to access trust funds without authorization, and used fraudulent documents to claim authority she did not possess. Amanda Vega is hereby appointed temporary guardian of Richard Vega, effective immediately, until a full competency hearing can be scheduled. All trust accounts remain frozen until a complete forensic audit is conducted. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down like thunder. I stood there trying to process what had just happened. I'd won. Not just won, but won decisively. My mother sat frozen on the other side of the courtroom, her face pale, her tissues forgotten in her lap. Martin shook my hand. That's how it's done. Congratulations. I helped my father stand and we walked toward the exit. Just as we reached the courthouse doors, a man in a gray suit stepped forward, his expression professionally sympathetic. He handed me a business card embossed with gold lettering, Carl Monroe Family Mediation Services. Ms. Vega, he said smoothly, your mother has retained my services. I understand this has been painful for everyone involved, but before this escalates further, we need to talk. For everyone's sake, including your father's. Please give me a call. I took the card, said nothing, and walked past him into the cold January air, my father's hand in mine, victory tasting nothing like I'd expected. Carl Monroe called me 3 days after the hearing, his voice warm and professional over the phone. Ms. Vega, I know you're probably not interested in talking to anyone connected to your mother right now, but I'd like to offer you something the court can't, a peaceful resolution. Would you be willing to meet just 30 minutes of your time? My office in West Hartford, or somewhere neutral if you prefer. I agreed to meet him not because I trusted him, but because I wanted to understand what my mother was planning next. We met at a coffee shop halfway between Boston and Hartford neutral ground where neither of us had an advantage. Carl Monroe looked exactly like his business card suggested, mid-50s gray suit kind eyes, the sort of person who'd perfected the art of appearing harmless. His office credentials were impressive when I looked him up. 20 years of experience mediating family disputes, specializing in estate conflicts and elder care disagreements. His website featured testimonials from grateful families who'd avoided years of litigation thanks to his intervention. A framed plaque in his online photos read, Connecticut Family Mediator of the Year 2019. This wasn't some sleazy lawyer my mother had dredged up. This was a respected professional who genuinely believed he was helping families heal. Ms. Vega, he began stirring sugar into his coffee with the careful precision of someone who did everything deliberately. I want to start by saying I've reviewed the entire court transcript from January 8th. Legally, you are absolutely in the right. Your mother made serious mistakes, and the judge saw through them. You won decisively. Then why are we here? Because winning in court and winning in life are not always the same thing. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. I want you to consider something that nobody in that courtroom discussed: the human cost. Your father is 65 years old with worsening dementia. Every court appearance, every moment of family conflict, every stressful confrontation accelerates his cognitive decline. The medical literature is very clear on this. Stress is poison for Alzheimer's patients. I said nothing, waiting for him to get to the point. Your mother is willing to settle, he continued. Privately, quietly, with dignity intact for everyone involved. She'll relinquish all claims to the house. You keep the trust fund, everything Rosa left you. She's not fighting that anymore. In exchange for what? 3 things, and I think you'll find them reasonable. First, she asks to remain in the house for 6 months while she finds somewhere else to live. Not as an owner, just as a tenant, giving her time to transition with dignity. Second, no criminal charges filed regarding the notary incident. Yes, it was a mistake, but she's terrified of going to jail at her age. And third, no public disclosure of the family conflict or the adoption records. She wants to maintain her privacy and her reputation in the community. I studied him carefully. He believed what he was saying. He genuinely thought this was fair. Mr. Monroe, let me make sure I understand. My mother spent years lying to my father, forged legal documents, tried to steal nearly $1 million, removed my father from medical care he desperately needed, and nearly destroyed me in court with false accusations. And now she wants me to let her stay in my house, avoid criminal prosecution, and keep all her secrets. I know how it sounds, he said gently, but consider this. Your mother is 63 years old. She's terrified. She spent her entire life believing that house was her security, her proof that she belonged somewhere. She made terrible choices out of fear. Does she really deserve to be criminally prosecuted, to lose everything and possibly go to prison? And more importantly, can your father handle testifying against his wife in a criminal trial? Because that's where this is heading, if you refuse to mediate. He was good. I had to give him that. He'd found the one pressure point that might actually work my father's well-being. Every word he said was technically true. Stress would make my father's condition worse. A criminal trial would be traumatic for everyone. My mother was scared and desperate. These were all facts. But something about the whole pitch bothered me. Mr. Monroe, I have a question before we go any further. Who's paying your retainer? He blinked, momentarily thrown. I'm sorry. Your retainer. You're a respected mediator with 20 years of experience. I looked up your rates. $15,000 for a case like this. Where did my mother get $15,000? According to public records, she can't pay my father's medical bills. She's 3 months behind on the HELOC payments. She just lost in court and probably owes her attorney another $10,000. So where did $15,000 for you suddenly appear from? Carl's professional warmth cooled by a few degrees. Ms. Vega, my client's funding sources are confidential. That's between them and me. Is it Elena? Did my sister pay you? I can't discuss that. Let me guess then. Elena paid you, which means someone recently gave Elena a significant amount of money. And whoever that someone is, they're very invested in making this case disappear quietly. They don't want publicity, don't want criminal investigations, don't want anyone looking too closely at my family's finances. Carl's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You're reading too much into a simple family dispute. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, someone with money is pulling strings behind the scenes. Someone who benefits from keeping this quiet. And I'd very much like to know who that is and why they care. He stood up, his professional composure back in place, but his eyes harder now. Ms. Vega, I came here in good faith to offer you a way out of a painful situation. Your mother is willing to walk away and give you everything you want. All she asks is basic human dignity. If you refuse, you're choosing to drag your sick father through months or years of additional litigation. That's on you. What's on me, I said calmly, is protecting what my grandmother left me from people who think they can steal it if they just make me feel guilty enough. Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Monroe. But no deal. If my mother wants to settle, she can start by being honest about who's funding this mediation campaign and why. He left without another word, and I sat there finishing my coffee, thinking about money trails and who might be desperate enough to spend $50,000 or more to make this all go away. My phone buzzed 2 hours later. Marcus Chen. My private investigator never wasted time with pleasantries. The text was accompanied by a screenshot of a bank statement. $20,000 transferred from Elena's account to Gloria January 3rd. Memo loan for legal fees to be repaid from house sale. But here's the interesting part. Elena received $50,000 on December 20th from someone named Marcus Chen. Searching now. I stared at that name. Marcus Chen. The same last name as the notary who'd committed fraud for my mother. That couldn't be coincidence. I texted back, find out everything about Marcus Chen. Family connections, employment history, relationship to Elena and the notary. And find out if there's more money moving around that we haven't found yet. 3 dots appeared then. Already on it. This is bigger than a family squabble. Something else is going on. We'll report back in 24 hours. I sat in my car in the parking lot watching Carl Monroe drive away in his expensive sedan and realized that my mother's attempt to steal the house wasn't just about greed or insecurity. Someone else was involved. Someone with enough money to hire mediators and pay off notaries and fund my sister's sudden generosity. Someone who really wanted to make sure I never looked too closely at what was hidden in Rosa's house. I didn't wait for Marcus Chen to finish his investigation. The moment I saw that $50,000 transfer, I knew my sister was the weak link in whatever scheme my mother had constructed. Elena had always been easier to read than our mother, more emotional, less calculating. If anyone was going to crack under pressure and tell me the truth, it would be her. I sent the text at 8 o'clock that night. Coffee, just us, no lawyers, no mom, tomorrow, 10 a.m., Starbucks on Asylum Street. If you don't show up, I'm filing a motion to depose you under oath about the money Marcus gave you. Your choice. 3 dots appeared, immediately disappeared, appeared again. Finally, I'll be there. The Starbucks on Asylum Street was neutral territory, public enough that neither of us could make a scene, private enough that we could talk. I arrived 15 minutes early with an envelope in my bag that I'd prepared the night before. Elena walked in at exactly 10 o'clock, and I barely recognized her. She wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her eyes were red and swollen, like she'd been crying for days. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness, the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying a secret that's too heavy. She sat down across from me, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around the coffee cup she hadn't ordered yet. Before I could say anything, she spoke. I know you hate me. I hate myself too. But before you judge me, please let me explain. I could have attacked. I could have listed every betrayal, every lie, every moment she'd stood beside our mother while I was being humiliated. But something in her face stopped me. She wasn't defiant. She wasn't defensive. She was broken. I'm listening, I said simply. That seemed to surprise her more than anything else I could have said. Her eyes filled with tears, and the story came out in a rush, words tumbling over each other like she'd been holding them back for so long that they'd built up pressure. Marcus had gambling debts, $180,000. I didn't know until our honeymoon. We were in Jamaica, and he got a phone call, and afterward he just fell apart. He told me he'd been gambling for years, online poker mostly, and he'd gotten in too deep with some people in Atlantic City. His bookie, some guy with connections, was threatening to ruin his career. He works in finance, Amanda. If word got out that he had gambling debts to organized crime, he'd be fired immediately. And they said they'd come after me, too. They'd destroy both of us if we didn't pay within 6 months. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice shaking. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go to Dad because Mom handles all the money. I couldn't ask you because we haven't really talked in years, and I knew how you'd look at me if I told you I'd married someone like that. So I went to Mom. And what did Mom say? She said she could help. She said the house on Maple Street was hers, that Abuela had left it to her, and she'd been planning to sell it anyway because it was too big and too expensive to maintain. She said she could take out a loan against it and give me the money to pay off Marcus's debts. She made it sound so reasonable, like it wasn't even a big deal. Elena's hands were shaking harder now. She told me you were rich, that you had this fancy job in Boston, that you didn't need help, that you'd probably just sell the house anyway if you inherited it, because you never really cared about family. She made it sound like I was just getting my fair share a little early, like it was only fair that she helped me the way she'd helped you with college. I never asked for help with college, I said quietly. Rosa paid for it, and Mom resented every penny. Elena looked up startled. She said she and Dad paid for MIT. They didn't. Rosa did, through a trust she set up when I was 16. My sister's face crumbled as another piece of our mother's carefully constructed narrative fell apart. I didn't know. I believed her. I wanted to believe her because I was so scared, Amanda. These people who Marcus owed money to, they weren't just going to sue us or ruin our credit. They were threatening violence. Real violence. And I convinced myself that if Mom said the house was hers, then it must be true. That I wasn't stealing from you, that I was just accepting help from my mother. But you knew Dad was sick, I said, keeping my voice level. You knew Mom was forging his signature. I didn't want to know, Elena whispered. Every time I saw something that didn't make sense, I told myself there must be an explanation. When Mom had me sign papers saying I'd paid her back from the wedding fund, I didn't ask questions. When she told me not to tell you Dad was in a memory care facility, I convinced myself it was because you were too busy to care anyway. I made myself blind because the alternative was admitting I was helping her commit fraud. She put her face in her hands and sobbed, her shoulders shaking. I helped her steal from you. I helped her manipulate Dad. I stood beside her in court knowing she was lying and I did nothing. And the worst part is I did it all to protect a man who might not even be worth protecting. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope I'd prepared. Elena looked up confused as I slid it across the table. What is this? Open it. Inside was a check for $50,000 made out to Elena Vega, along with a typed note on my business letterhead. She read it slowly, her eyes widening with each line. This is a zero-interest loan. You will repay me when you can. I don't care if it takes 20 years. But you will do 3 things immediately. 1. Tell Marcus he has 90 days to enter a certified gambling addiction treatment program or you're filing for divorce. 2. Stop covering for Mom's lies. Tell me everything she's planning. 3. If you ever manipulate Dad again, this debt becomes due in full immediately with legal penalties. Elena stared at the check like it was written in a foreign language. I don't understand. Why would you help me after everything I did? Because you're a victim too, I said. Mom has been manipulating both of us our entire lives, just in different ways. She made you think love came from needing her, and she made me think I could never be enough. But you're not a villain, Elena. You're just desperate and scared, and you made terrible choices because of it. Now you have a chance to make better ones. She was crying again, but differently now, her hands clutching the check. I don't deserve this. No, I agreed. You don't. But I'm giving it to you anyway because that's what actual family does. We don't manipulate. We don't exploit. We help each other even when it's hard, even when the other person doesn't deserve it. Elena wiped her face, took a shaky breath, and looked at me with something like hope. What do you want to know? Everything. Start with Marcus Chen. Who is he, and why did he give you $50,000? He's not related to the notary, if that's what you're thinking. He's Marcus's uncle. He paid off part of the gambling debt to buy us time. But Amanda, there's something else you need to know. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Mom's been meeting with another lawyer. Not Carl Monroe. Someone from New York named Victor Reyes. I overheard them on the phone last week. They were talking about invalidating the 2003 trust, about proving diminished capacity, about how Abuela Rosa wasn't mentally competent when she made you co-trustee. My blood went cold. She's going after the trust itself. Yes, she's not giving up Amanda. She's just changing strategy. She's going to claim that Abuela wasn't in her right mind when she cut Mom out and that the whole trust should be voided. Victor Reyes specializes in this stuff. He's won cases before, where he got wills and trusts overturned by claiming the person was senile or being manipulated. I sat back, my mind racing. My mother wasn't retreating. She was regrouping. And this time she was coming after Rosa's memory, Rosa's competence, Rosa's dignity. When is she filing? I don't know. Soon. Maybe this week. I stood up the envelope with Elena's check still on the table between us. Thank you for telling me. Use that money to get Marcus help and to get yourself free. And Elena, don't warn Mom that you told me. Let her think you're still on her side. My sister nodded, clutching the check like a lifeline, and I walked out into the cold January morning, already calling Martin to tell him we had another war to prepare for. Elena's warning gave me exactly 4 days to prepare. On January 15th, the petition arrived via courier, and the moment I read the heading, I felt something shift from legal battle to personal war. Petition to invalidate 2003 trust agreement on grounds of undue influence and diminished mental capacity. My mother wasn't just coming after the house anymore. She was coming after Rosa's memory, Rosa's dignity, Rosa's entire legacy. The legal argument was insidious in its construction. Victor Reyes had clearly done his homework. The petition claimed that Rosa Delgado suffered progressive cognitive decline between 2000 and 2005, pointing to a minor stroke she'd experienced in 2002 and ongoing high blood pressure that required medication. During this period of alleged vulnerability, I, then 16 to 18 years old, had supposedly manipulated my elderly grandmother into excluding my mother from the trust and making me a primary beneficiary. The petition further claimed that my father never genuinely consented to the arrangement that he'd signed under duress because he was terrified of the conflict between his mother and his wife. Therefore, the entire trust should be declared void, and the property should pass through Connecticut's intestate succession laws, which would give my mother, as the surviving spouse, primary claim to everything. It was brilliant legal strategy and absolutely disgusting moral theater. Martin called me within an hour of receiving his copy. They're going for the nuclear option. If they can prove Rosa wasn't competent, the entire foundation of your inheritance collapses. Every document she signed, every decision she made becomes questionable. We need to prove beyond any doubt that your grandmother was sharp as a tack right up until her death. I have her journals, I said. She wrote every day from 2002 until she died. They're coherent, detailed, brilliant. Get them to me immediately. And anything else that shows her mental acuity. We're going to bury them in evidence. The hearing was set for January 28th, giving us less than 2 weeks to prepare. Victor Reyes came to court with a sophisticated presentation, complete with PowerPoint slides and expert testimony. He was in his 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of confidence that comes from winning cases that shouldn't be winnable. His first exhibit was Rosa's medical records from 2002, showing she'd been hospitalized briefly for a transient ischemic attack, a mini-stroke that had resolved within hours. He highlighted her subsequent diagnosis of hypertension and the medications she'd been prescribed. Your Honor, Reyes said smoothly, these medical conditions are significant risk factors for vascular dementia. Mrs. Delgado was, by her own doctor's admission, at elevated risk for cognitive decline. Next came the psychiatric expert, a Dr. Raymond Pierce, who'd never met Rosa but had reviewed her medical files and performed what he called a retroactive psychological assessment. He testified with the dry authority of someone who believed his credentials made him infallible. Based on my review of Mrs. Delgado's medical history, there is evidence suggestive of early vascular dementia. The stroke in 2002, combined with poorly controlled hypertension, would have affected blood flow to the brain, potentially impairing judgment and decision-making capacity, particularly regarding complex financial matters. The testimony that hurt most came from Paul Hendricks, an 83-year-old neighbor who'd lived 3 houses down from Rosa for 40 years. He took the stand looking frail and nervous, his hands shaking as he was sworn in. "I liked Rosa very much," he said quietly. "But in her last few years I noticed things. She'd forget to lock her doors sometimes. Once she called me Miguel, which was her late husband's name, even though he'd been dead for 5 years. I thought she was getting confused, you know, the way old people do." And finally, Reyes presented pharmacy records showing that Rosa had purchased ginkgo biloba and other memory supplements in 2004. "Why," he asked the courtroom dramatically, "would a woman with perfect mental faculties need memory supplements?" The cumulative effect was damning. If you didn't know Rosa, if you only saw these cherry-picked pieces of evidence, you might actually believe she'd been declining, vulnerable, easily manipulated by a teenage granddaughter. Then it was our turn. Martin began with Rosa's journals, entering all 5 volumes spanning 2002 to 2005 into evidence. He read excerpts aloud, and Rosa's voice filled the courtroom, detailed observations about politics, philosophical reflections on family and loyalty, complex financial calculations for her volunteer work, helping women escape domestic violence. One entry from 2004 was particularly devastating to Reyes's case. "I know Gloria will contest this trust someday. She's too frightened of being powerless to accept that I've tried to protect both her and Amanda in different ways. That's why I'm documenting everything, being extra careful with every decision, making sure there's a clear record. When the time comes, Amanda will need proof that I knew exactly what I was doing." Next came video evidence. The church archivist had provided footage from a 2004 council meeting where Rosa served as treasurer. We played 3 minutes of Rosa presenting the annual financial report, fielding questions about budget allocations, correcting someone's math error in real time, and making a joke that got genuine laughs. She was sharp, engaged, completely present. Then came the medical affidavits. 3 physicians who'd treated Rosa in her final years all submitted sworn statements attesting to her mental clarity. Dr. Susan Chen, her primary care physician, wrote, "Rosa Delgado was one of the most mentally acute patients I've ever treated. She managed her own medications, asked intelligent questions about her treatment options, and maintained detailed health records. She showed no signs of cognitive impairment at any point during my care of her from 2000 until her death in 2005. But the moment that destroyed Gloria's case came when Martin called Paul Hendricks back to the stand for cross-examination. Martin's voice was gentle, almost kind, which somehow made the questions more devastating. "Mr. Hendricks, you testified that Mrs. Delgado seemed confused in her final years. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's what I said." "And you're certain of these observations?" A long pause. "Well, I thought so." "Mr. Hendricks, did anyone offer you money to testify today?" The old man's face went pale. "I don't have to answer that." Judge Morrison leaned forward. "Actually, Mr. Hendricks, you do. Answer the question." His voice was barely a whisper. "Mrs. Vega gave me $500. I needed it for my prescriptions. Medicare doesn't cover everything, and I'm on a fixed income." "And what did she ask you to say in exchange for that money?" "She asked if I remembered Rosa being forgetful. I said sometimes, maybe. She said that would be very helpful to mention in court." Mr. Hendricks, was Rosa Delgado actually confused and forgetful? He looked down at his hands, shame written across his weathered face. "No. She was sharp as a tack until the day she died. I'm sorry. I needed the money, and Mrs. Vega made it sound like I was just helping clarify things. I didn't realize I was lying." The courtroom went absolutely silent. Judge Morrison removed her glasses and stared at Victor Reyes with barely contained fury. "Counselor, Your client has presented perjured testimony and wasted this court's time with a frivolous claim based on fabricated evidence. Mrs. Delgado's journals alone would have been sufficient to disprove your case, but the fact that you brought a paid witness to lie under oath is unconscionable. Reyes stood trying to salvage something. Your Honor, I was not aware that my client had compensated Mr. Hendricks for his testimony. That's your problem, not mine. Petition to invalidate the 2003 trust is denied. Furthermore, I'm sanctioning your client for bringing a frivolous claim. Mrs. Gloria Vega, you are ordered to pay $12,000 in legal fees to the respondent within 30 days. This court finds your petition borderline fraudulent and will be referring this matter to the Bar Association for review of Mr. Reyes's conduct. The gavel came down, and it felt like a door slamming shut on my mother's last avenue of attack. As we filed out of the courtroom, my mother brushed past me in the hallway, and I heard her hiss under her breath, her voice venomous. You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming. There's one thing you'll never find because I burned it 15 years ago. I stopped walking, those words hitting me like ice water. Mrs. Whitaker had mentioned something Rosa said about Gloria burning the truth, and now my mother was admitting it, throwing it in my face like a taunt. Whatever she'd destroyed, she thought it was the one secret that would stay buried forever. She didn't know I'd already found Rosa's backup plan. I couldn't stop replaying my mother's words as I drove away from the courthouse. There's one thing you'll never find because I burned it 15 years ago. The smugness in her voice, the certainty that she'd destroyed something irreplaceable, haunted me for hours. I kept doing the math. 15 years ago was 2009, 4 years after Rosa died. What had Gloria burned, and why did she think it gave her some kind of power over me? Then I remembered. Mrs. Whitaker had said Rosa left specific instructions tied to specific trigger words. If Amanda comes back angry, give her this. If she comes back sad, wait. If she comes back silent, it's time. And there'd been something else. Something about if Gloria ever said certain words. I turned my car around and drove straight to Hartford, pulling up in front of Mrs. Whitaker's house at 8 o'clock at night. Lights were on inside, and I could see the blue flicker of a television through the front window. I knocked, hoping I wasn't scaring an elderly woman by showing up unannounced after dark. She opened the door in her bathrobe and slippers, her white hair in curlers, but her expression showed no surprise. I wondered when you'd come, she said simply. Your mother said it, didn't she? The words Rosa told me to listen for. She said she burned something 15 years ago, Mrs. Whitaker's eyes widened, something like sorrow crossing her face. Oh dear. Yes. Come in. I was hoping I'd never have to give you this, that somehow your mother would find peace without forcing Rosa's hand from beyond the grave. She led me to her small sitting room and opened an antique jewelry box on the mantel, the kind with a hidden compartment in the bottom. From it, she pulled a small USB drive no bigger than her thumb with a label in Rosa's distinctive handwriting for Amanda if she said she burned the truth. Your grandmother gave me this in 2004, Mrs. Whitaker said, pressing it into my palm. She recorded it in her kitchen, made me promise to keep it safe, and told me exactly when to give it to you. She said, if Gloria ever admits she burned something, it means she's using destruction as a weapon. That's when Amanda needs to hear this. I held the USB drive like it was made of glass, terrified of what I might find, and desperate to know at the same time. Mrs. Whitaker offered me her computer, but I needed to be alone for this. I thanked her, drove to a nearby hotel, and sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop open, my hands shaking as I inserted the drive. A single video file appeared. I clicked it, and suddenly Rosa was there, sitting at her kitchen table in the house on Maple Street, the afternoon light coming through the window behind her, making her look almost ethereal. She wore a simple blue sweater, her hair pulled back, her face lined with age, but her eyes sharp and clear. The timestamp read, March 2004, a year before she died. Mija, she began, and hearing her voice after 20 years broke something open in my chest. If you're hearing this, your mother has done something terrible. She's admitted to destroying evidence, to burning truth. I need you to understand what she burned and why it mattered. Rosa folded her hands on the table. her expression sad, but steady. In 1990, when Gloria married your father, I gave her a Bible as a wedding gift. Inside it, I tucked a letter. A long letter explaining everything: that she was adopted, that Maria was my sister, that you were my biological niece, and most importantly, why I loved her anyway. Why her adoption didn't make her less than anyone else. Why she was chosen, not just accepted. She paused, her eyes glistening. I thought honesty would free us. I thought if I put everything in writing, if I explained my reasoning, she'd understand that love isn't diminished by truth. Instead, 3 months after her wedding, she came to my house with the Bible and the letter. She'd read it, and she burned it in my kitchen sink while I watched page by page until there was nothing left but ash. She screamed at me that I was trying to erase her existence, that I'd never really wanted her, that the letter proved she was just a charity case I'd taken on out of guilt. Rosa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I tried to explain. I tried to tell her that I wrote the letter because I loved her enough to be honest. But she couldn't hear me. The fear was too loud. The fear that she wasn't really mine, that she didn't really belong, that everything I'd ever given her was fake. So she burned the only proof I had of my intentions, and she's been carrying that fear ever since, letting it poison everything. She leaned closer to the camera, her voice becoming firmer. But here's what you need to understand. Amanda love is not the same as inheritance. I loved Gloria every single day of her life. I fed her, clothed her, held her when she cried, celebrated her victories, forgave her mistakes. But I gave you the house because you understand something she never learned. You understand what it means to be powerless and still choose kindness. Gloria thinks power comes from ownership, from controlling things and people. You know power comes from character, from being someone others can trust, even when it costs you something. Rosa's expression softened. Don't destroy her, mija. I know you could. I know you have every legal right to prosecute her, to expose her, to take everything. But don't. Because revenge won't make you whole, and punishment won't make her better. What she needs isn't defeat. She needs to finally understand that she was loved all along, that the fear was lying to her. She smiled, then sad and wise. The house isn't revenge. It's a tool. Use it to build something beautiful. Make it a place where women who feel invisible can finally be seen. Where women who've been told they're powerless can discover their strength. Build Rosa House and let it stand as proof that love isn't about possession. It's about making room for people to become who they're meant to be. Rosa reached toward the camera, her hand briefly filling the frame before she pulled back. I know this is hard. I know you're angry and hurt and probably exhausted from fighting, but promise me this when you win, because you will win. Don't let winning turn you into someone you're not. Stay kind, mija. Stay strong. And build something so beautiful that cruelty looks ridiculous standing next to it. The video should have ended there, but Rosa leaned forward one more time, her voice dropping to a whisper like she was sharing a secret. Oh, and mija, one more thing. Check behind the painting of the Last Supper in the dining room at the house. I left something there. Not for you, for Gloria. Evidence of who she really was before fear took over. Maybe it'll help her remember. Maybe it won't. But she should have the chance to see herself clearly just once before it's too late. The screen went black, and I sat in the hotel room crying harder than I'd cried since Rosa's funeral, her voice still echoing in my head, her wisdom cutting through 20 years of pain and anger like light through darkness. She'd been right about everything, about Gloria's fear, about the burned letter, about what I needed to hear at exactly this moment. And she'd left one final gift behind the Last Supper painting, something meant not to hurt my mother, but to save her. I just had to figure out how to get into that house to find it. Rosa's final instruction echoed in my mind as I drove to Hartford the next morning, check behind the painting of the Last Supper. I'd obtained a court order allowing me to inventory trust property, which gave me legal access to the house, even if my mother tried to block me. When I pulled up to 428 Maple Street, I sat in the car for a moment looking at the house where I'd once felt safe, where Rosa had protected me, where I'd learned what love without conditions looked like. Now it felt like enemy territory. My mother must have been watching from the window because she appeared in the doorway before I even reached the porch. Her arms crossed over her chest, her face hard as stone. "Take what you came for and leave," she said, her voice cold enough to freeze. "I have a legal right to inventory the property," I said, holding up the court order. "You can call your lawyer if you want, but I'm coming in." She stepped aside but didn't move far, following me through the foyer like a prison guard. The house smelled the same as it always had, a mix of furniture polish and the lavender sachets Rosa used to tuck into closets. But it felt different, emptier somehow, like all the warmth had been drained out of it over the years. I walked straight to the dining room where the large reproduction of Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper hung on the wall facing the windows. It had been there since I was a child, an ornate gilt frame that must have weighed 40 pounds. I'd never paid much attention to it except to notice that it seemed too grand for Rosa's modest taste. "Don't you dare touch that painting," my mother said from the doorway. I turned to look at her. "Why, it's just a reproduction. It's not valuable." "It was a gift. You have no right." "From who? Who gave it to Rosa?" She didn't answer, but something flickered across her face. Fear, maybe, or the sudden realization that she'd said too much. I pulled a chair over from the dining table and climbed up to reach the top of the frame. My mother moved forward like she was going to physically stop me, but I was already lifting the painting off its hooks. It was heavier than I expected, and I had to brace it against my chest as I climbed down, careful not to drop it. "Put it back," Gloria said, her voice rising. "Put it back right now." I turned the painting around, examining the back of the frame. There, taped to the canvas backing with yellowed tape that had probably been there for 20 years, was a cloth pouch sealed with a zip tie. I pulled it free and opened it while my mother stood frozen in place, her face going pale. Inside was a small journal, leather-bound and worn at the edges. Rosa's handwriting filled the pages, entries dated from early 2005, just months before she died. I opened to a random page and read, "Gloria came by today. She asked again about changing my will. I told her again that I've already made my decisions, that everything is arranged to protect both her and Amanda in the ways they each need. She became angry, said I was choosing Amanda over her. I don't know how to make her understand that love isn't a competition." Beneath the journal were photographs, old Polaroids with that distinctive faded quality that dates them immediately. I picked up the first one and felt my breath catch. It was me at 13, wearing a t-shirt, my arm extended toward the camera. Bruises, dark purple and yellow, covered my upper arm in the clear shape of finger marks. Someone had grabbed me hard enough to leave prints. The second photo showed my shoulder, more bruises. The third showed my wrist. I remembered that day, now remembered Rosa taking these photos in her bathroom, her hands gentle, her voice steady. "I need to document this, mija, just in case." I hadn't understood what she meant at the time. Now I did. She'd filed a report with social services. She'd tried to protect me officially, legally, but she'd withdrawn the complaint when my mother promised to change, when Gloria swore she'd never hurt me again. The last item in the pouch was a letter folded and unfolded so many times that the creases were beginning to tear. The handwriting wasn't Rosa's. It was my mother's, younger and less controlled than her current careful script. It was dated 2004, addressed to Rosa, but apparently never sent. "You love her more because she's Maria's daughter, your real blood. I'm just the charity case you adopted out of pity. You gave her everything and gave me scraps. Don't expect me to smile while you erase me from my own family. I know what you're planning with that trust. I know you're cutting me out, and I know why. Because I was never really yours. I was never good enough. I was never real." The pain in those words hit me like a physical blow. My mother had known about the adoption, about the bloodlines, about everything, and she'd been carrying it like a wound for over 20 years. Gloria lunged forward, trying to snatch the letter from my hands, but someone else stepped between us. Elena. I hadn't heard her come in, didn't know how long she'd been standing in the hallway, but now she positioned herself between her mother and me, her face wet with tears. "Mom, stop," Elena said. "Just stop." Gloria's hands were shaking. "That's mine. That letter is mine. She has no right to read it." Elena gently took the letter from my hands and read it herself, her expression crumbling with each line. "You knew. All this time you knew about the adoption. You knew Amanda was Abuela's actual niece, that you weren't blood-related to Rosa." "Of course I knew." Gloria's voice cracked, decades of control finally shattering. "I found the adoption papers when I was 18. I confronted Rosa and she admitted everything. She told me it didn't matter that she loved me just the same, but I knew better. I knew that when it really mattered, blood would win. And I was right. She gave Amanda the house. She gave Amanda everything. Because Amanda was real family and I was just the mistake she'd made out of pity when she was too young to know better." "So instead of talking about it," Elena said, her voice thick with tears, "you let it poison everything. You let it turn you into someone who would hurt her own daughter, steal from your husband, destroy your family." "She destroyed it first," Gloria shouted, pointing at me. "She took everything that should have been mine. She was proof that I didn't belong, that I never belonged. Every time Rosa looked at her, she saw Maria, her real sister, her real family. When she looked at me, she saw a stranger's child she'd taken out of obligation. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother not as the villain of my story, but as someone trapped in her own tragedy, someone who'd built a prison out of fear and shame, and lived in it so long she'd forgotten there was a door. "You were loved," I said quietly. "Rosa loved you. The letter she wrote, the one you burned it, said that. You were loved, Mom, but you couldn't believe it, so you destroyed the proof." Gloria's face twisted and she turned away, her shoulders shaking with sobs she'd probably been holding back for decades. My phone rang, shattering the moment. I glanced at the screen. Chase Bank. I answered, still holding the photographs, Rosa's journal warm in my other hand. "Ms. Vega, this is Patricia Chen from Chase Bank. We need to inform you that a foreclosure lawsuit was filed against the property at 428 Maple Street 3 weeks ago. The trial date is January 20th. If the $340,000 debt isn't resolved by then, the house will go to auction on February 15th. I'm calling because you're listed as co-trustee and you need to be aware of the timeline." The words didn't fully register at first. Foreclosure. When was this filed? December 30th. You should have received notification by mail. I looked at my mother, who'd gone very still. "Did you hide the foreclosure notice?" She didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. The house we were standing in, the house we were fighting over, the house that held all of Rosa's dreams, was 3 weeks away from being taken by the bank and sold to the highest bidder, and none of us had enough money to stop it. The foreclosure deadline hung over us like a guillotine, but I knew we couldn't solve the financial crisis until we solved the deeper one. I called Father Thompson that night and asked him to arrange a family meeting at St. Catherine's Church for the following day. Neutral ground. Sacred ground. The kind of place where lies feel heavier and truth feels possible. We gathered in a small conference room behind the sanctuary, the 5 of us sitting around a wooden table that had probably hosted countless church committees and grief counseling sessions. My father was there with his caregiver, a patient woman named Linda, who'd been helping him since I'd gotten him out of the house. Elena sat beside me, still shaken from what we'd discovered behind the painting. Gloria sat across from us, her face gray and exhausted, looking older than I'd ever seen her. Father Thompson, white-haired and gentle-voiced, took his place at the head of the table. "We're here because we've been living with a lie for 35 years. I began, my voice steady despite the emotion churning in my chest. "Abuela Rosa loved you, Mom, but you never believed it because you thought being adopted made you less. It didn't. The only thing that made you less was your refusal to trust that love." Gloria stared at the table, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. "I found Abuela's recordings," I continued. "All of them. She cried for you every night, Mom. Mrs. Whitaker told me. Rosa didn't choose me over you because of blood. She chose to protect me because I was powerless, just like you were when you were a little girl in that orphanage." She was trying to break the cycle. She was trying to make sure no one in our family ever felt as helpless as you once did. My mother's shoulders began to shake, but she said nothing. Then my father spoke, his voice cutting through the silence with unexpected clarity. It was one of his good moments when the fog lifted and he could see everything with painful precision. "Glory," he said, and his use of her old nickname made her look up. "I chose you. Every single day for 40 years I chose you. I stayed when you yelled at me. I forgave when you lied. I protected you even when you were wrong. Why wasn't my love ever enough?" The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. Gloria's eyes filled with tears that finally spilled over. "Because I didn't think I deserved it. I thought you only married me because Amanda needed a mother. I thought everyone was pretending to love me out of obligation, out of pity, because nobody could actually want someone like me." Rick's face crumpled with sadness. "You decided you weren't lovable, Glory, and then you spent 40 years making it come true. You pushed away everyone who tried to love you because you were so convinced we'd leave eventually, that you wanted to control when it happened." Father Thompson cleared his throat gently. "We need to address the immediate crisis. The house is being foreclosed in 3 weeks. Amanda, you legally own half of this trust. You could let the foreclosure proceed and buy the property at auction for far less than $340,000. That would be legally justified but spiritually vindictive. Or you could pay the debt yourself, which would be generous but would essentially reward Gloria's attempts to steal from you." He turned to my mother. "Gloria, what are you willing to do to fix what you've broken?" My mother wiped her face with shaking hands. "I'll give her the house. I'll sign everything. I'll admit what I did. I'll do whatever the court wants. But please, I need 6 months to find somewhere else to live. And I want one thing, just one thing. Let me help build whatever Rosa wanted. Let me be useful instead of just punished. Please." Before I could answer, Father Thompson stood and walked to a small safe built into the wall. "Before anyone makes any promises, there's something you need to see. Rosa left this with me in 2005 with very specific instructions. It was only to be played if the family met here together trying to find peace." He pulled out a sealed envelope and withdrew a DVD. "She anticipated everything." He inserted it into an old television on a rolling cart, and suddenly Rosa's face filled the screen, sitting in this very room 20 years ago, looking directly into the camera with an expression of profound love and profound sadness. "Gloria," Rosa said, "if you're watching this, I have 3 things to say to you that I should have said when you were young." Rosa's voice filled the small room, and I watched my mother's face as she heard words she'd probably been waiting her entire life to hear. Rosa looked directly into the camera, her eyes wet but her voice strong, speaking to Gloria across 20 years of silence and misunderstanding. "Gloria, mi niña, if you're watching this, it means I failed you. I adopted you because I saw myself in your eyes. You were a little girl who had nothing, who'd been told by circumstance that she was nothing. I wanted to give you everything, a home, a name, a future. But somewhere along the way, I gave you something I never intended: fear. I taught you that love was something you had to earn through perfection, through performance, through being exactly what someone else needed. I should have taught you that love is something you simply are, something that exists because you exist." My mother's hands covered her face, but she didn't look away from the screen. "When Maria died, and I took in Amanda, I didn't know how to love both of you without making you feel compared. You were 23, married, building your own life. She was an infant who'd lost her mother. I tried to be fair, to divide my time and attention equally, but fairness felt like betrayal to you, didn't it? You interpreted equal treatment as evidence that you weren't special anymore, that this baby had stolen something that was rightfully yours. And I never corrected that belief because I was afraid. Afraid of the conversation, afraid of your anger, afraid you'd leave and never come back." Rosa leaned forward, her voice dropping to something more intimate. Here's the truth. I should have told you 20 years ago. You were never second. You were first. Always. Amanda is my blood. Yes, the daughter of my sister. But you? Gloria, you were my choice. And choice is stronger than blood. I chose you when you were 2 years old, sick with pneumonia, abandoned in an orphanage where nobody expected you to survive. I chose you every single day after that. Every tantrum, every argument, every moment you pushed me away to test if I'd stay, I chose you. My mother was crying openly now, her whole body shaking. But the house goes to Amanda, not because she's better than you, not because she's more deserving. It's because she needs protection from a world that silences women who choose independence over conformity. You married Rick. You had stability, security, a partner. Amanda was alone building a life in a world that still punishes women for being competent instead of charming. I gave her the house to give her a foundation. I gave you love. I thought love was enough. I'm sorry it wasn't. Rosa's expression shifted, becoming both sadder and more hopeful. Gloria, if you can let go of this house, maybe you can finally let go of the pain. The house was never the point. It was always a symbol, something that represented everything you thought you deserved but were denied. But you were never denied love. You were denied the ability to believe you were lovable. That's my failure as your mother, not your failure as my daughter. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to have this conversation while I was alive. I hope you can forgive me for my cowardice, and more importantly, I hope you can forgive yourself. Because until you do, every gift will feel like an insult and every act of love will feel like pity. The screen went black and the room was silent except for my mother's quiet, wrenching sobs. Father Thompson turned off the television and sat back down, giving us space to absorb what we'd just witnessed. After what felt like an eternity, my mother looked up at me, her face streaked with tears and decades of carefully maintained makeup running in dark trails down her cheeks. "I'll sign the house over to you," she said, her voice hoarse. "I'll pay back what I took, even if it takes the rest of my life. I'll do whatever you need me to do. But I need you to tell me one thing. Just one thing." She took a shuddering breath. "Can you ever forgive me?" I looked at this woman who'd hurt me in countless ways, who'd stolen from me, who'd tried to destroy what Rosa had built. And I saw not a villain, but someone who'd been drowning her entire life and had grabbed onto anything she could reach, even if it meant pulling others under with her. "I don't know yet, Mom," I said honestly, my own tears falling now. "But I can try." She nodded, something breaking and rebuilding in her expression simultaneously, and for the first time in my life, I saw my mother without her armor, without her defenses, just a frightened woman who'd never learned to trust that she was loved. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it, but Father Thompson nodded toward it and I pulled it out. An email from Chase Bank marked urgent in red letters. I opened it and my momentary hope collapsed. Foreclosure trial accelerated due to missed payments. Final payment of $340,000 due by February 14th, or property will be auctioned February 15th. No extensions possible under Connecticut foreclosure law. We had 2 weeks to save Rosa's house, and none of us had anywhere close to that kind of money. The next morning, we met at Martin's law office to put everything in writing. My mother arrived alone without Victor Reyes, looking smaller somehow without her legal armor. She wore no makeup, her hair pulled back simply, and when she sat down across from me at the conference table, I saw exhaustion written into every line of her face. "I will sign a quitclaim deed," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "transferring all my potential claims to 428 Maple Street to Amanda effective immediately. I will enter into a payment plan to repay the $340,000 HELOC debt from my pension and Social Security. It will take 20 years, maybe longer, but I'll pay every cent. I'll sign a promissory note, make it legally binding, whatever you need." Martin was taking notes, his expression professionally neutral, but I could see him glancing at me to gauge my reaction. "In exchange," my mother continued, "I ask for 3 things. Let me stay in the house for 6 months to transition out properly, to say goodbye to the home I thought was mine for so long. Don't disclose the adoption or the court proceedings publicly. Let me keep what's left of my dignity in this town. And let me help you build whatever Rosa wanted. Let me be useful, not just punished." Before I could respond, Elena, who'd been sitting quietly beside me, spoke up. "Mom, if you really mean this, if you're actually ready to be honest, you need to tell Amanda what you did with the $70,000 marked medical expenses. She deserves to know the whole truth." My mother's face went pale. I turned to look at her, waiting, and the silence stretched between us like a chasm. "That money wasn't for your father's memory care bills," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I took it as a HELOC advance in March to pay off Marcus's gambling debts. $70,000 to a loan shark who'd threatened to hurt Elena to destroy both their careers. I thought if I could fix her life, if I could prove I was a good mother by protecting my daughter from the consequences of her husband's mistakes, it would make up for everything else I'd failed at. But I just made everything worse. I robbed you to save her, and I convinced myself it was justified because you had money and she had nothing. I'm sorry." I sat back in my chair, processing this final piece of the puzzle. My mother hadn't just stolen out of greed or spite. She'd stolen trying to be the mother she thought she was supposed to be, trying to save one daughter while destroying the other. "Even with your agreement, Mom, we have a bigger problem," I said. "The bank wants $340,000 by February 14th. That's 25 days from now. You don't have it. I have savings, but if I drain everything to pay this debt, I'll have nothing left to actually convert the house into what Rosa wanted. So here's what I need to know. Are you willing to let me try to save this house the right way, by asking for help, by showing this community what Rosa stood for, and seeing if they'll remember? Because if I do that, your secrets might come out. People will ask questions. They'll want to know why the house was being foreclosed, why there's $340,000 in debt." My mother closed her eyes, and I watched her face as she made what might have been the hardest decision of her life. When she opened them again, something had changed. "Do what you have to do," she said. "I'm done hiding. If people find out I'm adopted, if they find out what I did, so be it. I'd rather lose my reputation than watch you lose Rosa's dream because I was too proud to face the truth." That afternoon, Father Thompson called with an offer. Rosa helped over 200 women in this town over 30 years. Women she co-signed loans for, women she helped escape violence, women she mentored and believed in when no one else would. "Let me organize a community meeting at the church. Let's see if they remember. Let's see if they'll help save her house." I agreed, hope and fear mixing in equal measure, and spent the evening drafting what I'd say, how I'd ask an entire community to save something most of them didn't even know was at risk. That night, exhausted and anxious, I checked my email one last time before bed. Among the spam and work messages was one from an address I didn't recognize, the subject line simply, "About Rosa Delgado's house." I opened it, and my breath caught. "You don't know me, but Rosa Delgado saved my life in 1994. I was 28 years old, fleeing a marriage that would have killed me eventually, with 2 small children and $40 in my pocket. Rosa found me at the women's shelter, co-signed my student loans, helped me believe I could rebuild. I've been following your court case in the newspaper. I want to help. How much do you need?" Attached was a screenshot of a bank statement with an account balance of $1.2 million, and at the bottom a signature, "Judge Maria Tesoro, Connecticut Superior Court, retired." I stared at Judge Tesoro's email for 20 minutes, reading it over and over, trying to understand why a stranger would offer to save Rosa's house. But she wasn't a stranger. Not really. She was part of the invisible network of women Rosa had helped, lives touched and changed by quiet acts of courage that my grandmother had never talked about, never taken credit for. I didn't respond to the email right away. Something told me to wait to see what the community could do first before accepting help from someone who'd already given Rosa so much gratitude. Father Thompson organized the event with remarkable speed. A celebration of Rosa Delgado's legacy was scheduled for January 25th at St. Catherine's Church, just 3 weeks before the foreclosure deadline. I helped design simple flyers that Father Thompson distributed through the parish bulletin and posted at the library, the community center, and local businesses. I wasn't sure anyone would come. Rosa had been dead for 20 years. People forget. But they didn't forget. On the evening of January 25th, over 150 people filled the church hall, far more than we'd prepared for. Women of every age from their 20s to their 80s, some I vaguely recognized from childhood, others I'd never seen before. Father Thompson opened with a prayer and then invited people to share their memories of Rosa. A woman in her 40s stood first, her voice shaking. Rosa co-signed my student loan in 1998 when no bank would touch me because I had no credit history and no family. I became a nurse because of her. I've helped deliver over 300 babies. That's Rosa's legacy, too. Another woman older with gray hair and kind eyes. Rosa drove me to the domestic violence shelter at 2 a.m. and stayed with me through my restraining order hearing. She held my hand when I testified. She made me believe I could survive. I did, and now I run a support group for other survivors. Story after story poured out. Rosa giving $500 to a woman fleeing abuse with 3 children. Rosa teaching English classes in her living room for immigrant women studying for citizenship tests. Rosa showing up at court hearings, job interviews, hospital rooms, never asking for recognition, never expecting repayment. Many of the women didn't know each other, but they all knew Rosa, and they wept as they remembered her. Within 3 days, the community had raised $87,000. Checks arrived in the mail, cash donations in envelopes, even a bake sale organized by a group of women Rosa had helped 30 years ago. It was beautiful and humbling and nowhere near enough. I sat at my kitchen table in Boston and did the math I'd been avoiding. My savings and investments totaled $340,000 accumulated through 15 years of careful budgeting and strategic planning. If I paid the HELOC in full, I'd have nothing left for renovations, nothing to actually turn the house into the community center Rosa had envisioned. But if I let the house go to foreclosure and tried to buy it at auction, someone else might outbid me and everything would be lost forever. After 3 sleepless nights, I made my decision. I'd use $250,000 of my savings combined with the $87,000 from the community. That left me $3,000 short and one person I could ask. I visited my father at Shady Pines, where I'd re-enrolled him the week before paying out of pocket because it was the right thing to do. I explained the situation slowly, carefully, not sure how much he'd understand. Rick had one of his beautiful moments of clarity, his eyes focusing with the sharpness I remembered from childhood. Mandy, I have $12,000 in an old IRA I set up in the 90s and forgot about. Take it. Use it. This house was never really mine anyway. It was always Rosa's dream and your future. I'm sorry I let your mother convince me otherwise. Let me be part of saving it. Let me do one good thing before I forget everything. I held his hand and cried. You've done lots of good things, Dad. You just forgot them. But I remember. He smiled that gentle smile I'd missed for so many years. Then that's enough. On February 13th, one day before the deadline, I walked into Chase Bank carrying a cashier's check for $340,000. Every dollar I had, every bit of security I'd built over 15 years, condensed into a single piece of paper. I was terrified and exhilarated and certain this was what Rosa would have wanted. I approached the teller window, and the representative, a young woman named Sarah, pulled up the account on her computer. She frowned, clicked a few more times, then looked up at me with confusion. I'm sorry, Ms. Vega, but the account was closed this morning. Someone already paid the full balance in cash. The HELOC is satisfied. The lien has been released. My heart stopped. Who paid it? Sarah handed me a cream-colored envelope with my name written in elegant script. They left this for you. My hands shook as I opened it. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter, the paper thick and expensive, the handwriting elegant and deliberate. Dear Amanda, You don't know me, but Rosa Delgado saved my life in 1994. I was 28 years old, fleeing a violently abusive marriage with 2 small children and $40 in my pocket. I had nowhere to go and no hope left. Rosa found me at the domestic violence shelter where she volunteered twice a week. She didn't just offer sympathy. She co-signed my student loans so I could go to law school, helped me find childcare I could afford, drove me to classes when my car broke down, and told me every single week for 3 years, "You are not broken, Maria. You are becoming." I went on to graduate law school, become a prosecutor specializing in domestic violence cases, and eventually a judge. Everything I am, everything I've accomplished, everything I've been able to do for others I owe to Rosa's belief in me when I couldn't believe in myself. I had to stop reading to wipe my eyes, aware that people in the bank were staring, but I didn't care. The letter continued. I've been watching your court case from the beginning. In fact, I was the judge who presided over a case 25 years ago, a divorce petition. Your mother filed against your father in 2000. She withdrew it before the hearing, but I saw the toxicity in those documents, the pattern of control and manipulation. I couldn't intervene at the time due to judicial ethics, couldn't reach out to warn anyone or offer help. But I never forgot your family's name. When I saw the foreclosure notice in the public records and realized it was Rosa's house at risk, I knew what she would want. Not for you to sacrifice everything you'd built to save her legacy, but for her legacy to be protected by those she'd saved. The $340,000 is not charity, Amanda. It's a repayment of a 30-year-old debt. The house is yours, free and clear. Build what Rosa dreamed of building. Create the place she envisioned. I'll be watching and I'll be proud. With eternal gratitude, Judge Maria Tesoro, retired. A second note was paperclipped to the bottom, written in the same elegant hand. P.S. Don't refuse this gift. Rosa refused to let me repay her while she was alive. She said seeing me succeed was payment enough. Don't make her mistake. Accept help the way she gave it, freely and without conditions. Pay it forward when your time comes. I sat down on a bench in the bank lobby and cried, really cried, the kind of crying that comes from a place deeper than grief or relief. The kind that happens when you realize you're part of something much larger than yourself. A stranger, who wasn't really a stranger, had just given me back my future. Someone Rosa had helped 3 decades ago had been watching, waiting, and when the moment came had stepped forward with the kind of generosity that defies logic and embodies everything Rosa had tried to teach me about what it means to lift others. I called the number listed on Judge Tesoro's letterhead, but a receptionist answered with the gentle firmness of someone delivering a rehearsed message. Judge Tesoro is retired and doesn't take calls, but she asked me to tell anyone who contacted her office regarding this matter, pay it forward. That's all the thanks she needs. I thanked her and hung up, sitting in that bank lobby for another 20 minutes, just breathing, just absorbing the reality that Rosa's legacy wasn't the house or the money or even the legal documents. It was this invisible network of women, helping women, each one lifting the next, a chain of compassion that stretched across decades and connected strangers through shared wounds and shared healing. Rosa's true inheritance wasn't property. It was a philosophy, a way of being in the world that said, when you've been powerless and someone gives you power, you use it to empower others. I walked out of the bank into the cold February afternoon, still clutching the letter, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out to see a text from my mother. I almost didn't open it, but something made me click. I heard what happened. Mrs. Whitaker told me about the judge. I saw the pictures from the community fundraiser on Facebook, all those women sharing their stories about Rosa. And I realized something. I spent 40 years being angry that Rosa gave you the house, that she chose you over me. But Rosa gave me something worth more than property. She gave me love and a chance when I was a sick 2-year-old nobody wanted. She gave me a life. And I wasted it being bitter instead of grateful. I don't want to waste what's left. Can we talk not as enemies, as I don't know what, but something different, something better. Please. I stood on the sidewalk, cold wind biting my face, reading my mother's words 3 times, and felt something shift inside me that I hadn't known was still locked. She was trying. Maybe too late. Maybe not enough. But she was trying, and Rosa would have wanted me to meet her halfway. I typed back, "Yes, let's talk." We agreed to meet 2 days later at a small coffee shop in West Hartford, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, neutral territory where neither of us held any power or history. I arrived exactly on time, but my mother was already there sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had probably gone cold. She looked older than I'd ever seen her, smaller somehow, as if the armor she'd worn my entire life had been stripped away and revealed how fragile she'd always been underneath. She wore no makeup, her gray roots showing through the dyed brown, her hands trembling slightly as she looked up and saw me. When I sat down, she didn't launch into explanations or justifications. She just looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and said, "I spent 40 years thinking Rosa didn't love me enough. But watching all those women at the church reading their letters about how she helped them, seeing how many lives she touched without ever asking for anything in return, I realized something. Rosa loved everyone. She had this capacity to see people who felt invisible and make them feel seen. And I hated her for it because I wanted to be special. I wanted to be the only one she loved like that. But you know what the saddest part is? I was special to her. She chose me when I was dying in an orphanage. She raised me. She loved me every day. I just couldn't see it. I was too busy being angry to notice I was loved. I didn't interrupt. I just listened, watching my mother cry quietly without the theatrical sobs I'd seen so many times in court without the performance. "I'm not going to tell you I'll change Amanda," she continued, her voice breaking. "I'm 63 years old. I've been angry and bitter for so long I don't remember what it feels like not to be. I don't know if I can be different, but I can try. And if I fail, I promise I won't blame you or Rosa or anyone else. I'll own it. I'll accept that I was the problem all along." I took a sip of my coffee, letting her words settle. Then I asked the question I'd been carrying for weeks. "Why did you burn the letter Rosa gave you, the one she wrote about the adoption?" My mother looked down at her hands, and when she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Because it confirmed what I'd always feared. That I wasn't real family. That my place was always conditional, always dependent on being good enough, perfect enough. I thought if I destroyed the evidence I could pretend it wasn't true. I could pretend I belonged without question. But the truth doesn't burn. It just waits in the shadows until you're forced to face it." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table. Inside was a quitclaim deed signed and notarized that morning, transferring all her claims to the house. Beneath it was a single brass key. "This is my house key. I'm moving out next week. I found a small apartment across town near the library. You don't owe me 6 months or 6 days. The house is yours. I don't have any conditions anymore." I picked up the key, feeling its weight in my palm, this small piece of metal that represented so much more than access to a building. "Mom, I don't need you to disappear. I need you to be honest, and maybe useful. Rosa House, the community center I'm building, it's going to need volunteers. People to answer phones, greet visitors, organize donations, help women who come through the doors feeling exactly the way you felt when you were 2 years old. Are you willing to do that kind of work without credit, without control, without making it about yourself?" She looked up, genuinely surprised. "You'd let me be part of it after everything I did." "I'm not letting you," I said carefully. "I'm offering you a chance to earn your way back. But Mom, if you try to take over, if you manipulate people, if you make this about redemption through position instead of redemption through service, I will ask you to leave. Do you understand?" She nodded slowly, something like hope flickering in her tired eyes. "I understand. I'll do whatever you ask. However you need me to help." We stood to leave, and for a moment I thought about hugging her, but it felt too soon, too unearned. We'd taken a step, but we had miles to go. As we reached the parking lot, her phone rang. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and her face went pale. "It's Marcus, Elena's husband." She answered, and I watched the color drain completely from her face. "What when we're coming right now?" She hung up and looked at me, fear replacing every other emotion. "Elena's in the hospital. Marcus said she collapsed at work. They're running tests. We need to go." Elena had suffered a severe anxiety attack, not a heart attack as we'd feared, brought on by months of stress, guilt, and the weight of secrets finally confronting consequences. She spent 2 days in the hospital under observation, and when she was released, something in her had shifted. She started therapy. She told Marcus he had 3 months to prove he was serious about recovery, or she was filing for divorce. And she asked if she could help build Rosa House not as penance, but as purpose. 6 months later, in July 2025, I stood on the front porch of 428 Maple Street and barely recognized it. The house Rosa had left me, the house my mother had tried to steal, the house Judge Tesoro had saved, had been transformed into something Rosa would have been proud of. We'd kept the renovations modest but deliberate. The living room where Rosa used to sit in her armchair reading was now a counseling area with comfortable chairs arranged in a circle, soft lighting, and walls painted in calming blues and greens. The dining room, where the Last Supper painting had hung for decades, hosted weekly community kitchens where women gathered to cook together, eat together, and share their stories without judgment. The 3 bedrooms upstairs had become temporary safe rooms for women fleeing dangerous situations, each one furnished simply but warmly with donated furniture and fresh linens. The basement, where my father had hidden his document box, was now a computer lab offering free digital literacy classes for older women who'd been left behind by technology. Everything had been funded through a patchwork of my remaining savings community donations and a small grant from Connecticut's Department of Social Services that Father Thompson had helped us secure. Rosa's old bedroom, the one she'd died in, had been converted into a library filled with books by and about women overcoming adversity. A bronze plaque on the door read, "Rosa Delgado, 1934 to 2005. She believed in us before we believed in ourselves." My mother worked at Rosa House 3 days a week as the receptionist, a position she'd accepted with surprising grace. She answered phones, scheduled appointments, greeted nervous first-time visitors, and organized donated goods. She didn't lead. She didn't make executive decisions. She served. At first, I could see her struggling with it, the way her hands would twitch toward control, the way she'd start to offer advice before catching herself and simply listening instead. But slowly, something fundamental shifted in her. I watched one afternoon as a 62-year-old woman named Patricia came through the door recently, widowed, terrified about managing finances she'd never had to handle before because her husband had controlled everything. My mother sat with her for 30 minutes, didn't interrupt once, didn't tell her what to do, and finally said with genuine warmth, "You're in the right place. We're going to help you figure this out. You're not alone anymore." Patricia cried with relief, and I saw my mother's face soften with something I'd never seen before. Not pride in being needed for her expertise, but quiet satisfaction in being useful. Being present. Being someone another frightened woman could trust. Elena had become our communications director, an unpaid volunteer position that let her use her social media skills for something meaningful. She managed our Facebook page, wrote monthly newsletters, and shared stories of women Rosa House had helped, always with permission, always with dignity. Marcus, who'd completed his 90-day gambling treatment program, now taught financial literacy classes every Thursday evening, using his own catastrophic mistakes as cautionary tales that resonated with brutal honesty. My sister and I were learning to be sisters again, though it wasn't easy. There were awkward silences, moments of tension when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But we were trying, and that counted for something. My father visited every Tuesday afternoon during his increasingly rare lucid hours. He'd sit in the library, sometimes reading aloud to the women there, sometimes just present and peaceful. On his good days, he remembered why we'd built this place. On his bad days, he simply felt safe. And maybe that was enough. In late November, an email arrived from the Hartford Courant. "We're doing a feature series on community heroes for our year-end edition. We'd like to spotlight Rosa House and interview you and your family about how you turned a family conflict into a force for good. This would be published statewide and potentially picked up by the Associated Press. Are you willing to participate? I forwarded it to both my mother and Elena with a simple message. This is your decision too. If we do this interview, the whole story might come out. The adoption, the court battles, everything. Are you ready for that level of honesty? The responses came within an hour. Elena, yes. Let's tell the truth, all of it. My mother's took longer, and when it arrived, it was just 3 words. I'm ready now. On December 10th, Sarah Chen arrived at Rosa House with a photographer and a notebook filled with questions she'd prepared after weeks of research. We'd agreed to meet in the library where Rosa's presence felt strongest, where the plaque bearing her name reminded us why we were doing any of this. My mother Elena and I sat together on the comfortable chairs we'd arranged for counseling sessions, and my father, having one of his increasingly rare good days, sat beside us with his caregiver nearby. Sarah was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with kind eyes and the careful demeanor of someone who knew she was walking into a complicated story. She started gently. Amanda, what inspired you to transform your grandmother's house into a community center? I chose my words carefully, aware that whatever I said would be read by thousands of people, maybe more. It wasn't inspiration. It was necessity. My family fell apart because we confused ownership with love. We spent years fighting over who deserved what, who belonged where, who had the right to claim pieces of each other. My grandmother knew that long before we did. She left instructions not in legal terms, but in spirit. Use this house to help women who feel invisible. So that's what we're doing. Sarah turned to my mother. Mrs. Vega, this can't have been an easy process for you. What changed? My mother took a breath, and I saw her hands tremble slightly before she steadied them. I learned the difference between being served and serving. It took me 63 years. The simplicity of that answer seemed to catch Sarah off guard, and she pressed further. There are rumors that there was a legal battle over this property, that there were court proceedings. Can you address that? My mother and I exchanged glances, a moment of silent communication about how honest we were willing to be. My mother spoke first, and what came out was more raw than I expected. There was a legal battle. I tried to claim this house as mine, even though legally it wasn't. I manipulated documents, lied to my family, forged signatures, and put my husband's health at risk by removing him from medical care he desperately needed. I did those things because I was terrified of being powerless again. I grew up in an orphanage with nothing. I was adopted, and I spent my whole life afraid that adoption meant I was conditional, temporary, not really family. I thought owning something, controlling something, meant I was worth something. I was wrong about all of it. Amanda had every legal right to destroy me, to press criminal charges, to expose me publicly, and watch me lose everything. Instead, she gave me a chance to be useful. That's more than I deserved. Sarah's pen had stopped moving. She was staring at my mother with something like shock, and I realized this interview was becoming something she hadn't expected. Not a feel-good redemption story with the rough edges smoothed over, but something uncomfortably honest. Elena spoke next, unprompted. I enabled my mother's lies because I was desperate. My husband had gambling debts we couldn't pay, and I thought protecting my marriage meant protecting lies. I helped manipulate our father, helped my mother steal from my sister, and convinced myself it was justified because I was scared. I learned that love built on deception isn't love. It's just shared fear. Sarah turned to my father, perhaps expecting him to be the easiest interview, the sympathetic figure who'd been victimized by everyone else. Mr. Vega, what's your perspective on all of this? Rick had one of those moments of perfect clarity that were becoming rarer every month. I failed my daughter by staying silent. For 40 years, I watched my wife hurt Amanda, and I said nothing because I thought keeping peace meant avoiding conflict. But real peace requires truth, even when truth is hard. My mother Rosa knew that. Amanda knows that. I'm still learning, but I'm running out of time to learn. The interview lasted 2 hours, and by the end, Sarah's carefully prepared questions had been abandoned in favor of following the raw honesty that kept spilling out. The photographer captured images I wouldn't see until publication. My mother's hands folded in her lap, my father looking at me with something like pride, Elena and me sitting close enough that our shoulders almost touched. The article was published on December 22nd with a headline that made my breath catch: "From Humiliation to Legacy, How One Woman Turned Family Betrayal into a Movement." Within 48 hours, Rosa House's email inbox was flooded with 340 messages from women across the country. Women asking for advice on starting similar programs. Women sharing their own stories of family betrayal and survival. Women who'd been invisible their whole lives suddenly seeing themselves in our story. On Christmas Eve, a formal letter arrived from the Connecticut Department of Social Services on heavy official stationery. "We would like to discuss a statewide partnership. Rosa House could become a pilot program for our initiative on elder care and women's empowerment. Annual funding $500,000. Meeting requested for January 7th. I read it 3 times before I believed it was real, then forwarded it to Elena and my mother with a message that Rosa would have appreciated: "We're just getting started." On January 7th, 2026, Elena and I drove to the state office building in Hartford, bringing with us a binder of documentation about Rosa House's first 6 months. The number of women served the programs offered testimonials from participants and detailed financial records showing how we'd stretched limited resources through volunteer labor and community support. My mother met us in the lobby dressed professionally, but simply her nervousness evident in the way she kept adjusting her collar. Dr. Vanessa Okafor, Connecticut's Commissioner of Social Services, was a woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes and the confident bearing of someone who'd spent decades navigating bureaucracy to create actual change. Her conference room overlooked the Hartford skyline, and 3 policy advisors sat with her, all taking notes as we presented Rosa House's model. "We've been searching for effective community-based approaches to support aging women," Dr. Okafor began, "particularly those who are divorced, widowed, or financially vulnerable. Traditional social services are chronically underfunded and carry stigma that prevents many women from seeking help. Rosa House is different. It's peer-led, shame-free, and addresses practical needs like financial literacy, housing assistance, and social connection in ways that respect dignity. We want to replicate this model in 15 cities across Connecticut over the next 3 years." She turned to me directly. "Amanda, we'd like you to serve as senior advisor for the program. 20 hours per week, $60,000 annual salary, which would allow you to maintain your financial consulting practice. You'd help train staff, develop curriculum, and ensure quality standards across all locations. This could help thousands of women." Before I could fully process the offer, Dr. Okafor turned to my mother. "Mrs. Vega, we read the current article very carefully, and we followed up with additional research into family reconciliation models. Your story moving from conflict to genuine reconciliation is exactly what we need on our community advisory board. Many women carry shame about past mistakes. You could be living proof that transformation is possible at any age. Would you be willing to share your story publicly as part of our outreach?" My mother looked stunned. "But I'm the person who did terrible things. I tried to steal from my own daughter. Why would you want me representing your program?" Dr. Okafor smiled with genuine warmth. "Because transformation without honesty is just performance, Mrs. Vega. You're not performing. You're actually changing. That authenticity is rare and powerful." The formal partnership terms were laid out. I would serve as part-time senior advisor, maintaining my career while helping expand Rosa's vision. Elena would become full-time executive director of the original Rosa House with a $55,000 salary, managing daily operations. My mother would serve on the voluntary community advisory board, speaking at public events and policy meetings. The state would provide $500,000 annually in operational funding with standard oversight and evaluation requirements. My father would remain an honorary board member, attending when his health permitted. I looked at my mother and sister. these two women I'd spent so much of my life fighting against, and ask the question that mattered. This is bigger than us now. This is bigger than our family or our pain or our history. Are we ready for that? Gloria nodded, tears in her eyes. Yes, I'm ready. Elena reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Let's do this. For Rosa. For all of us. We signed preliminary agreements, shook hands with officials who would help us change lives, and walked out of the state building into the bright January cold, feeling like we'd just committed to something that would define the rest of our lives. My phone rang before we'd even reached the parking lot. Father Thompson's name on the screen. Amanda, you need to come to St. Catherine's right now. There are women here, 18 of them, who saw the article and drove from all over New England. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Vermont. They're asking if Rosa House can help them today. Some of them have nowhere else to go tonight. What do I tell them? I looked at my mother and sister, and without speaking, we all understood. The movement we'd just agreed to build wasn't starting in 3 months or 3 years. It was starting right now. We helped all 18 women that night, finding temporary housing, connecting them with resources, and proving to ourselves and to them that Rosa House wasn't just a concept or a grant proposal. It was real, and it was ready. That emergency response became our template for the year that followed, a year of impossible growth and exhausting purpose that transformed not just the house on Maple Street, but all of us who worked there. On Christmas Eve, 2026, exactly 2 years after the night that changed everything, I stood in the backyard of Rosa House and watched workers finish setting up the rented tent that would extend our dining capacity. We'd organized our first annual Christmas Eve community dinner open to any woman over 50 who would otherwise spend the holiday alone. We'd expected maybe 40 people. We'd prepared for 60. 120 women showed up. They came from everywhere, widows whose children lived across the country, divorcees estranged from families who'd taken their ex-husbands' sides, mothers whose adult children had disappeared into addiction, or anger immigrants thousands of miles from home, formerly homeless women now rebuilding their lives in subsidized housing. They arrived nervous and uncertain, and we welcomed each one by name, seated them at one impossibly long table we'd created by pushing together 15 borrowed folding tables and covering them with donated white tablecloths, simple candles, and flower arrangements from every florist in Hartford who'd wanted to contribute. There was no kids' table. There was no VIP section. Just one table where everyone belonged equally. I stood at the center, not the head, and waited for the room to quiet before I spoke. 2 years ago, I was seated at the kids' table while my family celebrated without me. I thought it was the worst moment of my life, the final proof that I would never be enough. But it was actually a gift, because it showed me exactly who I didn't want to become. My grandmother Rosa taught me that strength is quiet, that dignity is not demanded but lived, and that the best revenge is building something so beautiful that cruelty looks ridiculous standing next to it. I gestured to the women around the table, their faces illuminated by candlelight. Tonight, there are no outsiders here. There are no second-class seats. There is just us women who've been told we're too old, too difficult, too much, or not enough. But we're here, and we matter. The applause was warm but brief, and then my mother stood. I hadn't planned, this hadn't asked her to speak, but I saw the determination in her face and knew I couldn't stop her, even if I wanted to. My name is Gloria, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. And I'm the one who made Amanda sit at the kids' table 2 years ago. I did it because I was cruel, insecure, and terrified of being invisible. I spent 60 years demanding respect instead of earning it. I almost destroyed my family because I confused control with love. Her voice broke slightly, but she continued. If anyone here has ever made someone feel small because you felt small yourself, I see you. I was you. And if anyone here has ever been made to feel worthless, I'm sorry. Not just to Amanda, but to all of you. This house is proof that it's never too late to choose service over selfishness. The room went completely silent, and then applause began, genuine and sustained. and I watched my mother cry tears that looked like relief. After dinner, as people lingered over coffee and dessert, a little girl about 9 years old tugged on my sleeve. She was the daughter of a woman we'd helped escape domestic violence 3 months ago. "Miss Amanda, my mom says you're a hero. Are you?" I knelt down to her level, looking into eyes that reminded me of my own at that age. "No, sweetie. I'm just someone who got tired of being treated like I didn't matter. So I built a place where everyone matters." She smiled and ran off to find her mother, and I stood up slowly, taking in the room. My father dozed peacefully in his wheelchair near the fireplace, a blanket over his lap. Elena was laughing with a group of younger women, probably talking about the social media campaign she'd designed. My mother was in the kitchen with 3 other volunteers, elbow deep in dishwater, refusing to let anyone else clean up. On the wall above the fireplace, a wooden plaque read, "For those who were once seated apart, you are home now." Rosa Delgado, 1934 to 2005. As guests began to leave, bundled against the December cold, an elderly woman I didn't recognize approached me and pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand before disappearing into the night. I opened it later alone in Rosa's old bedroom that was now my office. "I was at that Christmas dinner 2 years ago. I was one of the people who looked away when your mother humiliated you. I'm ashamed I said nothing. But I'm here now. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to stand up. A reformed coward." I folded the note carefully and walked to the library where Rosa's Bible sat on a shelf. I opened it and placed the note inside alongside dozens of others just like it. Stories of transformation, apologies, promises to do better. They made me sit at the kids' table, so I built one big enough for everyone, and no one sits alone anymore. If you've made it to the end of Amanda's story, thank you for listening. This wasn't just a tale about inheritance or family betrayal. It was about something deeper, the choice between bitterness and purpose, between demanding respect and earning it, between revenge and legacy. Amanda could have destroyed her mother legally. She had every right, every piece of evidence, every moral justification. But she chose a different path, one that Rosa had been trying to teach her all along. She chose to build something so meaningful that the cruelty she endured became irrelevant in comparison. What strikes me most about this story is how many lives were touched by one woman's quiet generosity. Rosa Delgado never sought recognition. She never demanded gratitude. She just saw women who were powerless and gave them tools to become powerful. And 30 years after helping a young mother escape violence, that mother, now a judge, paid forward the gift by saving Rosa's house. That's the kind of legacy that outlasts any amount of money or property. I want to ask you something. Have you ever been made to feel invisible? Have you ever sat at the metaphorical kids' table while others were celebrated? Or maybe you've been the one who made someone else feel small because you were afraid of your own smallness. There's no judgment here. We've all been on both sides of that table at different points in our lives. What matters is what we choose to do when we finally see the pattern clearly. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own family, your own wounds, your own capacity for either cruelty or grace, please subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. And more importantly, leave a comment below. Tell me, what would you have done in Amanda's position? Would you have chosen mercy or justice? Have you ever had to forgive someone who didn't deserve it? Or have you been the one asking for forgiveness you knew you didn't earn? Your story matters. Your perspective matters. And I read every single comment. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's building something so beautiful that cruelty looks ridiculous standing next to it. See you in the next story.